The next special meeting of West Essex Highlands application will be January 29th, 2025, in person in Town Hall at 6:30 PM, and no additional notice will be required. Roll call, please.
January, what'd you say?
No.
What's it, 9th or 29th? What'd you say?
January 8th.
Um,
January 8th is our next regular meeting.
Regular meeting.
29th will be.
Twenty-
Special meeting.
Okay.
At West Essex Highlands.
Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Alpert,
Here.
Mr. Cardoza, Ms. Caffrey,
Here.
Mr. Klein,
Here.
Mr. Wilks,
Here.
Council President Rutherford, Mayor McCartney,
Present.
Mr. Guarino,
Here.
Chairman Bago.
Here. Thank
For the
you.
record, Mr. Morgan will be joining us tonight.
Mr. Cardoza said he'll be about 15, 20 minutes late. He's in traffic. Ms. McGovern, will you swear in the township professionals, please?
Who's our engineer?
Sorry, Trevor Taylor from CME Associates.
All right, Mr. Taylor and Mr. Hazel, please raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. PB 24-01 West Essex Highlands Incorporated, Block 179, Lot 32, Zone IH1, Warner Road. The applicant is proposing to develop a 496-unit inclusionary multifamily residential development on a 120-acre property in the northwest corner of the township of West Orange. For the applicant, Mr. Plucker.
Hi, good evening. Brian Plucker from the firm of Hutch Manowitz and Plucker here on behalf of the applicant West Essex Highlands, Inc.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just about to say, I confirm with Ms. McGovern, we do not have any witnesses to call this evening. My understanding is that Mr. Affron will hopefully start and conclude his cross-examination of Mr. DeFeo, after which we can adjourn till the January 29th meeting.
Perfect, thank you. So we're waiting for Mr. Efron to cross-examine Mr. DeFeo, so we'll take a couple of minutes and repass. And I will make one more announcement. The next regular planning board meeting will be held January 8th, 2025 at 7:30 PM via Zoom. And I would like to welcome all the people that are on Zoom this evening to this meeting. Joe, you can cut right now, so
We're on a break.
we're on a break. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your forbearance. Traffic this evening has been horrible. Mr. Efron, you're up, sir.
Good evening. I'm sorry I'm late. We.
Okay, no problem. We
there's a huge amount
understand.
of rain and traffic. So, yes, thank you. We're not going to be very long. We're finishing up essentially with the cross, so. I realize there's nothing else to do tonight on this case, but we won't be that long in particular. I'm sorry, just need one more minute. Mr. DeFeo, good evening. We're back. Good. How are you? Before I go further, did you have a chance to look at that exhibit we posted?
What's that? Mr. DeFeo, you're reminded that you are under oath.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Go right ahead, Mr. Efron.
It's hard to hear you in the back, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Online, right? Yeah.
I'll just hold it. That might be easier. Is that better?
Thank you.
Okay. My voice is not so good, so I may not be able to project too much, so thank you. Mr. DeFeo, did you have a chance to look at the tree plan that was posted? We referred to it at the last meeting.
If you were referencing what plan specifically, the one that you posted on the website?
Right, it was from 2010 from the developer.
Yes,
Can we
I,
mark it if it hasn't been marked, just so there's a clear record?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if it was or not. I don't.
No, I don't, no, it wasn't up there yet. There was no notice with it, so we didn't have it marked yet.
The O2?
I believe so.
The tree plan, and what's the date on that?
Just call it 2010 tree plan. Thank you. It has other information, but I think that's
What's
sufficient.
your purpose for?
And as I noted in my communication, we're not offering it for purposes of the development application that's a part of that. That was a 2010 proposal. We're using it for the tree plan information, and the only other relevant information on the document would be the test sites that are marked out by cross-hatching. But the actual development plan, which was a single-family housing project, has no relevance to what we're saying. So you've had a chance to look that over?
I have.
Okay. Have you ever seen that before it was posted?
No,
Now, when you did your work in terms of your tree survey was done in 2019? What was the year for it?
2019,
Yeah, that was where those spot checks were done. That was the year 2019, correct?
correct.
Now, when you did that, what other tree surveys for this property had you been familiar with?
I'm not certain I understand the question.
Well, at the time you supervised the 2019 survey, had you been familiar with any other tree surveys or tree plans for this property?
No, they wouldn't have been relevant even if I had. I didn't know of any.
Why wouldn't they be relevant, in your
Because-
opinion?
in my opinion, because I was asked to look at this property for the first time in terms of doing an analysis, and therefore I would have developed and utilized our own methodologies and done a new study, a study that is current, because it would have been relevant to the site plan as it was proposed.
Well, the trees on the site are on the site regardless of what plan someone's proposing. So why would looking at an earlier tree survey not be relevant?
It would depend on how the survey was done. You were asking relevance. Did I look at this particular submission? First, this is a statistically invalid set of data. There's nothing in this form, exhibit, I believe we called it 03.
Oh, three, yes.
Exhibit 03 is statistically flawed. It does not meet the standards of a forest tree study in any way, shape, or form, either statistically or in methodology. There is no methodology provided within what I have. Therefore, even if I had seen it, I would have rejected it out of hand. This particular study used 3 plots of 10,000 square feet with no methodology stating how they selected the plots. Utilizing this method, they utilized approximately 2.2% of the property. I don't know if they selected the plots because they saw heavy tree growth or not. 2.2% utilizing a tree survey is statistically invalid. Proper tree surveys must use anywhere, depending on the method, between 4 and 5%, and the plots must be randomized. There's no evidence that these plots are randomized. Our tree study was utilized creating randomized plots on, the current site plan, which is why we focused on the area of disturbance. We used 22 plots and overall sampled approximately 4% of the property, utilizing what's then continued a mean system, utilizing a rolling mean, which is considered a statistically valid method of reducing the number of plots you might use. So let me explain that. We might have used 50 plots had we wanted to get to 5%. But after seeing 22 plots and using the rolling mean method of analysis, which is all explained in the tree report, what we determined is there's no variability. We don't need to do more plots to get the same numbers to get to the same end. This tree study, or whatever you wish to call it, you can call it a tree study, but I wouldn't give it that credibility. This particular drawing used 10,000 square foot plots, which might tell me more about trees in that 10,000 square feet because it's in that 10,000 square feet, but did not utilize sufficient quantity or coverage of land and does not explain that it used a rolling mean. There's no proof of non-bias. As far as I can tell, it could be a biased plot. And one of the interesting elements of it as well is it either misidentifies a tree by species because it recognizes a bur oak. Bur oak is not indigenous to our area. So either they misidentified it, and it's very common to misidentify oaks, by the way. That's not unusual in the woodland area. So either they misidentified it or someone put it there. And why someone would put it there, I don't know.
Put what, on the chart
The
or on
bur
the
oak.
grounds?
No, the bur oak. Identifying one of the trees as a bur oak. Bur oak is not indigenous to our area.
Well, that doesn't mean it's not growing there. We have lots of things that aren't indigenous.
That's true, but it's a bur oak is not that common to find. It's more likely it's an indicator that it's misidentified. My point being, there are enough flaws in this entire methodology that it had no validity to me. This has no validity in my mind, and therefore I wouldn't have used it even if it had been submitted, even if I had seen it. Again, for the reasons cited, it's statistically invalid. It does not have methodology. It does not cover sufficient quantity of area. It's not non-biased. It has no randomization. And it's for a site plan that isn't anything near what we're working off of. Having said all of that, if it does anything, it comes up with a number of trees per acre that could be higher, depending on how you read it. If that's true and it was accurate, then it would only corroborate our study, which says that the forest is in decline and that the number of trees per acre is declined because trees are dying. And we know ash are dying, and we know that for a fact, and we know beech will be. So yes, I did review it after you had posted it, and I discount it completely.
Why do you say there's an indication that it would mean trees are dying? Explain that.
Well, if it shows a higher concentration, as some people may say, depending on how you choose to read this, you can pick and choose numbers off of this thing any way you like. But the simple fact is it's a statistically invalid and meaningless piece of paper.
Why don't you answer my question? Why do you say it means trees would die?
If it shows a higher concentration of trees, my study, the study we did would show fewer trees per acre. If it does that, and my point being, all it would mean, so if, for example, if you read off of this, Exhibit 03, and by the way, I'm using what is off the website. Is that allowable, counsel?
We'll
Yeah,
call it on the screen eventually, but I'm gonna hear your
It's
answer.
just, I just not downloaded it, but just opened it up.
It's the same
Website.
document. I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is showing here average of trees, certain size, 2 inches or greater. 2 inches are not a tree, technically. That's another flaw with the study. It shows 558 trees per acre. Then it shows 182 trees per acre, 6 inches or greater. Okay, so if it's 182, it's actually showing less trees per acre than we calculated. And as I stated
That's
earlier,
because you're taking away all the 2-inch trees.
2-inch are saplings. They are not trees, nor are they defined as trees by the tree ordinance in Warren.
Well, actually, the
Farm.
category you're referring to is 2 to 6 inches, not just 2-inch trees. You would
I
agree
understand
4
that. So
inches,
the
well,
point
you
is-
would agree 4 and 6 inches are trees by every definition.
Absolutely, but I would also say I have no methodology. There's no methodology explaining what trees are what. Where did they draw the line between 2 and 4? As I said, this document is not, in my opinion, worth I hate to say paper, because it's not printed on paper, but not worth the paper it's printed on.
Now, you say it means trees are dying because they have more trees than you found. Is that the basis of your
I
reasoning?
didn't say that. I said if it was accurate, if the higher number. was
Assuming for the sake of argument, it's accurate for my question. You said it would mean the trees were dying and it confirms your view of a dying forest.
What I-
Isn't that what you said?
No, not exactly what I said. You're taking it out of context.
I'm using the very words you gave us. If there's a different context that you intended, please give it to us.
I'll try to explain it again.
Well, no, just answer my question.
I,
Why do you say that if their study is accurate, it means the trees are dying? Why do you say that?
our study is statistically valid. Our study shows fewer trees per acre. Our study utilized the highest number of trees per acre in order to make the greatest impact possible on the site and still came in at a lower concentration. Oddly enough, depending on where the 558 and 182 fall, where we go from 4 inches or other, then the interesting element of it is the 2 to 6, you almost have to discount out of hand because there's no methodology saying, where's the 4, 5, and 6? We don't know.
Well, that
There's
doesn't
some
matter
number.
if you're counting 2 to 6 inches, you can make a
But
category.
counting 2 to 6 inches is inaccurate. It doesn't comply with the West Orange Tree Ordinance. A tree is defined as 4 inches DBH or greater. Anything less is not a tree. It's a sapling.
That ordinance, what ordinance is that? Do you have the number in front of you?
I don't I don't know the West Orange Tree Ordinance.
Is that the ordinance number, excuse me?
I don't know.
Is that the okay, the current ordinance that's in force?
And almost any tree ordinance in the state of New Jersey and anyone who does forestry work defines a tree as 4 inches DBH or greater. Anything
When-
less than that is a sapling.
When you refer to the tree ordinance, you mean the one that's in force currently now
To
in
the
West
best of
Orange?
what I would read now, when this was done, I can't tell you, but in relation to the work I was doing, the initial ordinance from that time of 2019, we wouldn't have focused on too much other than that. So my point being, even if the thing was accurate, which it's not, it is statistically invalid and it is an invalid document. It has no meaning from the perspective of trees per acre, in my professional opinion.
I appreciate hearing that. You've said it several times. I asked a simple question. Why do you say that this means the trees would be dying? It's a simple question.
Because if you have a higher count from, this actually was done in,
2010 bucks.
no, it was actually, the tree study was done in 2007, if I recall. Looking at this plan, I'd have to look at it again, but my recollection reading this was that it was done in 2007.
We'll settle that
So let
date,
us
but
say
the
that
point
that
is,
makes it 12 years old from the time it was done to when we performed our study. We also did a quick update, as you know, and didn't find any significant visual difference in 2019 to 2024. But if the tree count went down per acre, that would indicate there are less trees.
that would assume your count is accurate as
Correct.
well.
And our count is accurate.
Now, if theirs is the accurate count, that would mean no evidence one way or the other about trees dying,
But
right?
there is no if their count is accurate. This study is flawed. It would never stand up to any scrutiny by any professional forester, arborist, botanist, or biologist.
You've had the study several weeks already. Did you trouble yourself to contact Mr. Anderson and get the information about how the survey was done?
I've been away for a week. Mr. Anderson and I have played telephone tag. We did speak briefly, but, and I said, I've never seen this before, Paul, and he said, no, you haven't. And, we went from there. And I guess the best site would be, he doesn't, I don't think, know how this was done. I don't know if he does. I can't speak for him.
Well, Mr. Anderson signed it, okay? You saw his signature there, right?
Engineers sign the work that other people do in their firm all the time.
Ask
It-
Mr.
Did the
Anderson,
tree study. I
did you
don't
ask,
know. I
did
don't
you
know.
ask Mr. Anderson for the tree study, the actual documentation and notes underlying this document?
This is what I was provided. This is what I reviewed.
Now try answering the question you're given, please. It's not that difficult. Did you
I did.
ask Mr. Anderson for the underlying documentation?
I did not ask for anything further than what I was provided.
So you can declare that this study is invalid statistically, invalid scientifically, invalid arboreally, and you never even asked for any of the information underlying it. Is that your testimony? Yes or no? Is
I
that your
don't need,
testimony?
I do not need to see the underlying report because enough information is given here to tell me, just looking at these three plots, you have not statistically, not you personally, of course, it has not statistically covered sufficient land area to be accurate. It's that simple.
Now, you said you had a tree report that referred to the rolling mean method. Am I using the right terminology?
There are methodologies that you utilize. The
I-
tree study that I posted, to answer your question.
Is
you
that
asked me to
the-
Post it and it was posted.
Is that what date? Is that the October 16, 2024 report?
No, I believe that.
Where's your actual?
I'd have to look and see the filings.
You haven't used that in your testimony as far as I know. It
That was
hasn't been
something
before the board.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. I was asked after I don't know which hearing, to post the original tree study from 2019. It
Did
is my
you- did
recollection
you
of it,
post
and I know I submitted that.
It's on the November 6th report, I think. I see it starts with, I've attached 4 documents, the original tree study conducted by Amy Green. Is that what you're discussing?
I mean, Mr. DeFeo is making reference to what's in his tree report, yet he's never testified to it before. It's never been introduced as an exhibit. I have no idea what he's talking about.
I believe it has been, I'm almost positive it was submitted at your request.
I don't have it. I've never
can't
seen
answer
it
that.
before. Do you have it in front of you right now?
Here, let me go back.
Tree report complete file updated. On the
No.
agenda.
There's the update, and then
Yeah.
I believe there was the original.
What? Okay, so we'll go back to that. Let me ask you a question. If you go back to your presentation, right?
Is this working, Joe? Yeah. Okay.
Go to the page with the spot study identification. No, the circles.
That?
Move my head again.
Yes. thank you.
Yeah.
Now,
I don't-
what's the actual geographic area covered by each of your test areas?
Test areas are 100, they're 10 by 10s.
The 10 by 10.
roughly 100 square meters.
I'm sorry, meters or feet?
At 100 square feet, 10 by 10,
All right, so each one is 100 square feet, correct?
approximately,
Okay. And how many do you have?
22.
22. And so 100 times 22 is 22,000. So you're saying you did a 22,000 square feet survey, 2,200, excuse me. My apologies. I'm going to use my phone.
Just don't do my taxes, we'll be fine.
2,200. Mr. Efron, it's 2,200.
200 square feet.
Mhm.
Well, that's very interesting. You said that this survey was how many square feet?
Each plot was 10,000.
Square feet.
I'm sorry, you're talking to Mike, sorry. 10,000, yeah.
Well, that's a heck of a lot more than you did.
And I'll explain again how this works.
No, don't go explaining anything. Answer the question. Isn't that a lot more than what
Yes.
you did?
I said that early on, yes.
No, you said earlier that they did 2% and you did 4 to 5% of the site.
Okay, again, I'll try to explain the difference. They used 30,000 square feet of 113 acres. That was their study area. We had a very defined study area because we had an
Ah.
up-to-date site plan. So we used a defined study area based on the approximate 27 acres being disturbed. We randomized the selection, not in the field. That selection was randomized using GIS data before we went to the field. That's how you ensure randomization. We're not looking at the woods, which indicates.
Oh, wait, let's go back to the size issue. You're saying that when you said you did 4 to 5%, it was of the 27 acres and their 2% was of the whole 113 acres. Is that the idea of what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. So in reality, they actually tested far more forests than you did, but your percent of the area of disturbance is higher than their percent of the whole property. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying, I'm sorry. By the way, I misstated. I apologize. I had so many numbers in my head, I misstated the numbers.
Well, you're the scientist, you tell us.
They actually studied about 0.6% and we did about 2.2%. The difference being if you take a 10,000 square foot plot, clearly within the 10,000 square feet, you have a better chance of identifying all the trees within 10,000 square feet because it's a bigger plot. So on the specific 10,000 square feet, you might get more detailed information about the speciation. But from a statistical study standpoint, you pick your plots, randomizing them. Randomizing them makes them more accurate in any statistical analysis.
So I really don't mean to interrupt you, but you've said this many times. I have some questions I'd like to get to. All right. Now, what do you mean by randomized? What does that actually mean? You keep using the phrase, you say it's randomized. The selection of these is randomized. Who did the selection of your spot checking? You got 10 by 10 squares. Who selected those sites?
I'll explain it again. What we
No,
did-
no, it's a simple question. Who selected the sites?
Yeah, and I have explained it and I'm going to explain it again.
All right, Mr. I have
answered your
one-
question before and I'll answer it again.
Mr. DeFeo, you haven't answered that question at all. It's a simple question. Who selected the sites that we're looking at on the screen?
I will answer your question again. We selected that, working with Davies, they were charged, find me, randomized study plot. They use a GIS methodology, which means you don't go to the forest first. You use satellite imagery, you use a GIS randomized plot system. So the computer helps to pick the plots randomly. Randomizing means I have no bias. So when you see a particular circle, we just pick a circle. It's sort of like, I don't know, if you're dividing something up among friends and you have a bunch of numbers in a hat and you close your eyes and pick a number out of the hat, it's randomized. You have a random chance equally of any one of those circles being picked. That is what randomizing
So
means.
you closed
That's
your
what-
eyes, and like the pintail on the donkey, you just put your finger and all of a sudden, all of those spots ended up only on the exact area of disturbance. Is that what you're calling randomized?
No, I'll try to explain it again. We
I'm
use a
sorry.
computer.
I think he said the computer randomized it.
Yeah.
No, he didn't say that actually. He said we use GIS.
He did say, he did just say the computer
No,
randomized.
he didn't say that. They use GIS to do a randomized identification. That's not what he said. Let's narrow this down. Did the computer pick the sites or did people you work with pick the sites? Let's start with that. Who picked those
The
circles?
numbered dots, not the circle, the numbered dots you're talking about. 1 through 40, 50.
The computer
whatever.
picks those.
And you told it to pick it within that yellow shape.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I got that so far.
That's what makes it
Who
randomized.
picked the black circles? Who picked the black circles?
Okay, it's okay.
I'm
The-
trying to get to it.
The
I'm
forester,
half an hour late, just trying to get to the point.
the
Who picked black-
forester in his office, the forestry team, then looks at all those dots and said, okay, how do we get a good cross section of that yellow area? And let's start with the first 22 circles. And that's what you do. You notice there are 55 circles there.
Right.
That's because in a purely statistical basis, if you wanted to cover the right percentage, you would go 55. You circle the first 22, and then when you're in the field and you start seeing the data coming in, you start to run random, what they call a running mean. And that running mean says, statistically, nothing is changing here. There is no reason to keep circling spots because nothing is really statistically different. So therefore you stop and run the running mean and do a statistical analysis. But everything in terms of that selection is randomized. There's no, let's pick plot 16 because it gives us better trees. Whereas this particular, wrong finger. This particular study that you referenced and provided to me, I have no way of knowing why those 10,000 square foot plots were picked. And I don't know that anyone would at this point after
All right, so let me
17 years?
just summarize.
Did you ask Paul Anderson?
No,
Right, so then you can't really make that statement if you've not inquired about it. You're making.
I
it
said I
seem
have
like
no
you're
way of
not
knowing.
Say that again?
I stated, I have no way of knowing if it's a randomized study because the methodology should be provided on that sheet and it's not.
Well, it's not provided on the document we're looking at that you gave us.
This is a PowerPoint just meant to overview things. It's not meant as the testimony.
Well, the point is you suggested they did not do a randomized study. They did not do a
I
statistical.
have no evidence
valid
that they
study
did. That's correct.
Because you didn't bother finding out. Isn't that correct?
No, because it doesn't say that. They would have said it on this plot sheet. When you submit a plot sheet of that detail, you should say whether it's a randomized study. I don't know. As far as I understand it, this was just done by a landscaper. That's the one thing Paul did tell me. He said this was done by a landscaper or a landscape company or something along that line.
He didn't
not
say
by
a
a forester.
He didn't mean a landscaper as in a guy who pushes the lawnmower.
I don't know what he meant. It was a landscape company. He said, when it was not a forester, I do know that because I did ask that question, by the way. Did they use a forestry company that understands this type of analysis? And he said, no.
Mr.
It's
Anderson.
my
told you
recollection.
no?
That is my recollection of my discussion of what he said.
But you have no knowledge as to who did the study
And I-
that we're talking about.
No, and I don't really
Okay.
care because it's statistically an invalid study.
And fine, you've made this point. Thank you. Now I want to clarify something on the question of the randomization. We're looking at I'll call it we don't have page numbers, so I'll call it, I think it says
Oh, I'm
tree
sorry.
survey plots at the very
Sorry,
top.
Where you want? Up here? Is that what you're asking?
We're looking at the screen, yes.
Yeah, which one?
Go back to where we were. I didn't ask
Oh,
you to
I'm
change
sorry.
it. No. It says tree survey conducted December
Thank you.
10th, 2019. That's the page. Now we've
Yes.
zeroed in on it so we can see the circles better. Now, there are light green lines all over. That's the area of disturbance of the proposed project. Is that correct?
Correct. Based on the planning that we had at that time.
It's
Yes.
the area of disturbance of the plan.
Yes.
Yes. Now, so when you say the computer did a randomized selection, the computer was told to select only within the area of disturbance. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Okay, I want to clarify this because if it's ever reviewed by another body, we need to make sure this is understandable. So when you say randomization, the computer chose random spots within those light green lines. Fair to say?
Yes. It was given parameters. It's what you do with a computer. Correct.
And then, and they seem to be fairly evenly distributed numbers throughout the green lines. Would you agree with that?
I haven't plotted the distance between it. The computer would pick whatever distance it deems necessary.
Mr. DeFeo, you're looking at it with your eyes like we are. I'm asking you a
I
question.
haven't measured.
Then,
but I
Mr.
would say it
DeFeo,
seems
let me,
fairly evenly distributed. Yeah, I would say
that
that.
wasn't so hard. Thank you. That's all I'm asking. And then I want to clarify exactly the next stage. Then people you worked with, you or others, chose numbers that the computer picked and took a selection. Is that correct?
Yes, in order to maximize the distribution of the study.
Right. In other words, so the computer chose random numbered sites that look fairly evenly distributed within the green lines.
Correct.
You directed it to do that. And then your staff or people you work with chose circled areas within that. Fair to say?
That'd be a fair, yeah.
And each of those circled areas represents a 10 by 10 section.
Correct, 100 square feet.
Okay, good. Now, let's turn to the tree survey from 2010, Exhibit 03, if we could put that on the screen.
I don't have that.
No, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just so I can correct the record. Do I keep saying 100 square feet? Yeah, it's 100 square meters. It's 10 meters by 10 meters. I'm sorry. I've been traveling in Europe and back, and I don't know whether I'm in metric or English right now.
So wait, your survey spots.
100 square meters, sorry. They're 10 meter by 10 meter. That's the standard.
Metric, not linear, correct? Okay.
That's metric. That's what we should be using.
Good.
I
They were
apologize.
metric.
I've been trying to do kilometers and meters.
This is 03, right? What we have up here right now.
I can't actually see very well, but it looks like it's right. Okay.
I can't. Oh, you're asking it. I thought you meant the year.
I just want the exhibit number noted for the record. It's 03.
Yeah, that looks right.
Mr. DeFeo, I don't know if it's really relevant, but if you're, if you should be doing the math in metric, if it was 100-meter plots instead of 100 square feet plots, does that change the percentage
No.
of the acreage that you covered?
No, it
Okay.
doesn't really change anything.
Yeah.
Because we work off the conclusions. I just have been misstating the square foot. I apologize for that.
So I'm assuming they use meters as well, but that doesn't indicate one way or the other. All right, so if we could zero in on, well, first, let's leave it like that for the moment. Mr. DeFeo, you see in the screen, there are 3 square areas. One in the top center, one on the left bottom, and one in the middle right. You see those?
Yes,
Okay, those are the cross-hatched areas that are on the printed exhibit. And that represents the areas they surveyed in 2007 to 10, right?
yes.
Okay. And so, and on the actual
I got it.
exhibit, when you zero in on it, they're diagonal lines. They're not crosshatched, they're diagonal lines. And so there are these 3 square areas. Those are the 10,000, I'm assuming it's meters as well, square
I think it's
meters.
10,000 square feet, but
I don't know whether it is or not, but let's assume, let's assume feet for the sake of argument, all right? Those are the 10,000 square feet areas that you referred to earlier, correct?
yes,
Okay, good. So now if we could move in on,
10,000 square feet.
yeah, well, actually, so if we look at the right side, now this is another development plan for single family homes, but you can see basically the square area on the right side is essentially roughly in the middle of where building D would be on this present plan. If we can move over to the right. And then we can go up a little bit. Then I'll have to ask you to go down again after, yeah. So that's kind of near the ridge. That's roughly where building D would be in part on the current plans.
I don't know.
Okay, but now let's move down to the text on the document to the bottom if we can. And if we could, let me just open my copy. So I can see what these are.
It's not the trees. The point is about the trees. We don't know if they're in the same areas. It's not.
Now, they find, if you look at, if we could zero in a little more on that text, just so it's, if we can make it a little bigger.
Mr. Efron, are you
Thank
going
you.
to make this somewhere cohesive with what we're looking at today? There's got to be a nexus with looking at something because the original plan had single-family homes. This is not that plan.
Well, the trees are the same is the point.
I'm sorry?
It's a survey of trees. It's got
Right,
nothing
but
to do
the
with.
survey of trees, as you see, it is an overlay of single-family homes. So the understanding of the 2 different applications before us, there's an application before us of one thing, that these trees that his study shows are in an area of disturbance. These seem to be outside the area of disturbance for today. I just want to see that there's a nexus somewhere that we can say, I'm relating it because of this. Does
Well,
that
I
make
think, I
sense?
think the square on the right side is probably in the area of building D, but the other two, and the one in the center is probably in the area of disturbance of the central buildings. The one to the far left is probably not within the current areas of
Well, we're gonna
disturbance.
get to something that the board can use, yes? Some information that we want to hear.
If I can go further, you'll see. It's not, we're not referencing it specifically to the area of disturbance. We're looking at the quantum of trees. That's
Okay.
my purpose. So
How
it's
is that relevant for these proceedings?
because, well, that's why Mr. DeFeo is here.
Well, it seems like he doesn't like the tree number in the ordinance, which is an ordinance which could have been challenged. We're not here to challenge ordinances or question the propriety of the zoning ordinance.
I don't know what ordinance
I'm gonna
Mr.
give him
Pluck
more
is referring
latitude.
to.
Because the board has to hear how this is relevant. So go along, we'll see if the board finds more information that is relevant.
Yeah, if we could, I'm sorry, if we could just zero in as much as we can, it's hard to read we only need the numbers actually. On this document, if we can go to the bottom text and enlarge it. Well, the whole thing, if we can move across, but we need it large enough to see. Right, so if we can now move over to the left. We'll start with the left side. Now, I just want to clarify the numbers. Now, Mr. DeFeo, you've said you think this is an invalid study. I understand your position. I want to introduce the numbers on this study and compare them to yours. It's the same forest, right?
I'm sorry, say
It's the
that.
same forest, right?
The forest hasn't moved, but it's certainly evolved to whatever's, it's happened in 12 years and trees have died.
Well, you've testified several times already that there was no major die-off of trees to your observation.
Other than that,
Other than ash, right? So as far as the rest of the forest goes, it's a stable forest at this point.
stagnant. You keep saying stable. I'll tell you it's stagnant,
The point is, there's been no major die-off, as you've already testified, correct?
except for ash.
Okay. So whatever, trees were noted, other than say Bora ash and an occasional casualty in 2007 and 2010 should still be there today, although they may have grown bigger. Fair to say?
Possibly. I have no way of knowing.
Well, you said there was no major die-off on this site, so the trees that were there in that period probably are still there today. Isn't that fair to say?
Again, I have no way of knowing. I haven't seen the individual trees. You're asking me to be clairvoyant and tell you what exact trees are in a given plot on a map that's statistically invalid.
I didn't ask you about exact trees in any manner. I simply said to you, if it's true, as you said, that there's been no major dieback of trees on this site over the last decades,
Other
then
than
the
ash.
trees that were, other than Bora ash, we heard, then the trees that were there on the 2010 survey probably are still there. Isn't that a fair statement?
Possibly. Sure. Probably, maybe. That's why we did an independent tree study in 2019 to make certain that we had accurate data. This document is completely inaccurate and therefore I discount every bit of data in there.
Even though you never spoke to anybody who did the survey, you
Doesn't
never
matter.
looked
It's
at
a
any documents.
statistically invalid document because it did not study sufficient quantity of area, nor does it give you the calculation methodology, nor anything else. The simple fact is when you have something that uses such a very small, non-randomized, as far as I can tell, system, it is statistically invalid and therefore I discount this.
Can I go to my questions now?
Your time.
Now, you projected 211 trees per acre on average, isn't that correct?
I think it was 212, but it's been a while since I've looked at that sheet again. 212.
Now, on the basis of that, you calculated for the entire property 25,440 trees, is that correct?
I would have to look at the slide to give you an, hang on. Sounds about right.
I'm reading it from your slide.
I'll take your word for it. You wouldn't lie to me.
Now, that was your count of 4-inch trees and greater, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, this study, if you look on the document, came up with an average of 558 trees per acre. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay. So that's almost 3 times larger than your average calculation, correct?
Does. Yes.
You also said there are no 2-inch trees.
Now, they yield a total of 63,361 trees in the range between 2 inches and 6 inches. And they yield a total of 20,666 trees, 6 inches and higher. For a total, and I've done the math, I don't think it's on there, but those two figures together equal 84,027 trees.
I'll believe your math.
What happened to 60,000 trees?
This report is statistically invalid and therefore, are you familiar with GIGO? Garbage in, garbage out? There's garbage data in and there's garbage data out. I do not give any credibility to this report because the data is flawed. The methodology is flawed.
This survey
Study
was,
area is flawed. Ergo, it is statistically invalid and therefore these numbers are meaningless.
why is the study area flawed?
Well, as I stated earlier, there are 3 10,000 square foot plots. That sounds very impressive, by the way. And if I wanted to know what the 10,000 square foot looked like, it's good. But statistically, it's 0.61 roughly percent of the area of study. That is a statistically invalid tree study. Ergo, the conclusions it draws must be statistically invalid.
Your percent of the area of study is much, much smaller, isn't it?
No, my percent of the area of study that we did was approximately a little better than 2.2 to 3%, approaching 4, using a running mean, which is acceptable in the industry as a statistically valid study.
You get 2.2% only because you're measuring it against the area of disturbance, whereas in this study, they were measuring it against the whole plot of the forest. Isn't that correct?
You define your study areas when you do a forest.
Mr.
survey.
DeFeo, do you have a constitutional problem with answering yes or no to any question? You define,
Reference?
you define 2.2% of the area of disturbance. And then you're saying their percentage is based on the whole 120 acre forest. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Ackerman, let me try to answer your question again. As I'm under oath and I have to speak to my best professional ability, a yes or no answer may not be true. Ergo, yes, I have a constitutional problem giving you a yes or no answer.
Let me simply
if it's
repeat my
untrue.
question. Mr.
Let me
DeFeo.
answer your question, can I?
No, let me repeat the question. You have said that your study covers 2.2% approximately of the study area, correct?
Mhm.
And you say theirs,
Yes, sorry.
and you say their study covered 0.6% of the area of study, correct?
Correct.
And so you're saying you covered much more area in your study than they did. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yes, of our study area, we covered a higher percentage, correct, which is
But when you
statistically valid.
When you say 2.2%, you mean of only the area of disturbance of the proposed development. Is that correct?
That is what we were asked to focus on, correct? Yes.
And when you say they have 0.6% of the area of study, they're using the entire forest of approximately 120 acres, correct?
This is a totally different site plan.
Mr. DeFeo, answer my question.
I am trying
The
to.
0.6% that they're studying was of the whole site, correct?
Of 113 acres, that is
Correct.
correct.
So when you say you have a
100.
higher percentage, you actually have a lower percentage of the whole forest study, but a higher percentage of your own area of study that you focused on. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Affron, you seem to have a misunderstanding of the statistical methodology.
I
I'll
don't
try
think
to
you need to
clarify.
worry about what I understand or don't understand. Let me just ask my questions, please. All right, so I want to be clear for the record. They studied much more square footage or meters of the forest than you did, but your study area is a larger percentage of the area of disturbance, whereas theirs was of the whole forest, correct?
Mr. Wait, hold it. I think everybody's getting confused here. There's 2 studies.
Right.
Both have extrapolated based on their methodology. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm just saying there was a methodology used. They extrapolated and neither one looked at every tree in the forest.
Right.
But each study extrapolated based on statistical averages that they used,
Correct.
whatever each group felt was reasonable in their hands based on their expertise, and extrapolated to the whole forest. And they said, based on these areas, so one had 3s in the 2010 study with a different project, was in three areas. They used larger surface areas and extrapolated to the whole forest.
Right.
Mr. DeFeo, with computer modeling, picked 22 areas in a geographically smaller area, but still extrapolated to the whole forest. Is that pretty much what we're all saying here?
That is one interpretation, and that's correct. Mr. DeFeo extrapolated to the whole forest by taking sites only in the area of disturbance, whereas this average from 2010 extrapolates to the whole forest by taking three areas in different parts of the forest. Mr. DeFeo limited it to the present area of disturbance. Now,
But-
my
but
question to Mr.
Those are
DeFeo,
also different, but truth be told, it's also different areas in the forest. The first study in 2010 took three areas. They were different,
obviously, correct.
three
Yeah,
different areas.
absolutely.
Mr. DeFeo's study also took three different areas in a smaller geography, but they're multiple different areas. Can we agree on that?
No, we can't, because
Okay.
Mr. DeFeo took
I want the
areas.
board- I want the board to be, because this is important that the board understand.
Mr. DeFeo took areas from the area of disturbance. because
Yes.
That's where trees are going to be removed, so that's what he studied.
The area of
Of
disturbance,
this
in
current application.
the area of disturbance in 2010 was the area that you saw on those blocks. Different area of disturbance.
Well,
So-
in 2010, they were building a subdivision throughout much of the forest.
But if you
correct?
looked at the houses, because I was on that board, the area where you see the small, if you could pull that up again, these are housing units. So the disturbance, those blocks were also, based on what I see here and my understanding of what you're all saying, the area of disturbance was different. So this plots three areas, larger areas, but they were still disturbed area. If we're using terminology of disturbance, that area is disturbed, that area is disturbed, and that area is disturbed. Is that something we can agree on?
No, we can't because
Okay,
I don't
so
think
you're
you're correct.
saying that there's no disturbance going to be in these three areas.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
I'm trying
This,
to
what
understand.
we have on the screen, the 2010 study, was for a subdivision of, let's call it 150 houses for the sake of argument. Obviously, disturbance goes throughout the site. What we have here in the current development plan is an area of disturbance roughly in the center of the forest.
More
but not on the
concentrated.
Periphery, correct. So there's different areas of disturbance on the current plan versus the one from 2010.
Agreed.
However, our purpose is not to compare the two developments. Our purpose is to show that there is another study that this developer did that shows 3 times more trees on this site than Mr. DeFeo identified.
I understand that.
And that's
Okay.
where we're going.
Okay, I understand that.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
He's talking about the entire.
But we have to agree that these are in areas of disturbance for that plan.
They're not disturbed areas. They were forests then and they're forests now. That's
But-
the difference in terminology. They would have been disturbed on that plan.
Yes.
Correct.
So,
And
so,
just like the areas of disturbance here will be disturbed if it's ever built.
so
Correct.
both would have been disturbed because neither one is disturbed at this time. Both, if done, would have been disturbed.
Correct, but that's not really relevant to counting the trees.
It's okay, but I'm trying to understand where we're
Yeah.
going.
I think,
I
that-
hope this,
Chair, I have a question.
yes, sir.
Um,
Mr. Council President.
but Mr. DeFeo, you said that there needed to be a 4 to 5% area study in order for the study to be valid. At least that's my recollection of your earlier testimony.
That's correct, unless there is a running mean methodology utilized, which the study did.
Okay, because when you were testifying about that, it seemed to me like once you came back to your actual calculations, 2.2%, which would be less than the 4 to 5% you claim would be necessary for the study to be valid.
But as I also stated then, however, it's a however. You would do that unless you run a running mean calculation that specifies, I don't need to do more study because nothing is changing statistically. So the running mean says you don't have to get to that number.
Okay, and by a running mean, you mean as you analyze it.
They're
you have one, then you analyze the second and the third, and as you get that, mean, if it stays within a certain level of variance, you don't need to go further.
Correct. And they look this, you look at it statistically, and if it has a high level of confidence, you don't need to keep going and doing that work.
Okay, now the follow-up question would be, and this would be for you, Mr. Afrin. Do you have the methodology that was used for this 2010 study?
I do not have that, and my purpose is simply to show there's 2 studies with vastly different numbers of trees.
Okay, so that's the Reader's Digest version. We want to hear that there's
Yeah.
Somehow there's one study that shows X amount of trees and one study that shows more than X amount of trees, and you're gonna come,
That's correct.
okay.
That's
got it.
correct.
Thank
That's
you.
our purpose. That's our purpose.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And we'll have our own experts later in the case, but our purpose right now is to show this since Mr. DeFeo was here.
Okay.
I don't want to make him keep coming back unless he plans to be.
Okay,
Now, Mr. DeFeo, in terms of the 22 study areas on your study,
Mhm.
how many of those study areas did you actually count and include in your final results?
I'm sorry, how many did?
You said there were about 22 study areas on
Yeah.
your study, the 10 by 10 plus. How many of those study areas did you actually include in your final calculations and results?
The 22 is what was used in the final calculations and results. There were 50 plots actually put on the site by the computer, but 22 were actually physically surveyed.
But I thought you just answered it in terms of Council President Rutherford's question. I thought you just said that once you see everything's looking the same, you stop counting. That would imply you stopped using some of the sites and only used a
No.
few.
We stopped at 22 because to do the 5%, we would have had to do 55.
Okay,
But after doing 22, we run the running mean. You don't have to keep going to 55.
that's what I wanted to clarify.
Just to
Thank you.
clarify.
So you
Wasn't-
did 20,
I probably wasn't clear on that.
okay, so you did 22.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so your 212 per figure is based on the calculations from the
Correct.
20
The area,
sites.
that's correct.
Great, thank you. Now, the calculations, if we, well, I think we have the numbers, but the calculations would be 84,027 trees on the site from the 2010 study, and your study indicated 25,440 trees. Now, obviously, one differential on the two studies is they were including trees between 2 and 4 inches, and you started at 4 inches, correct?
Because trees, a plant under 4 inches is not a tree.
You did not include trees between 2 and 4 inches, is that correct?
Because anything under 4 inches is not a tree. I did not include plants under 4 inches because that's statistically invalid.
I understand, and you say it's statistically invalid, and that's fine. Now, this survey from 2010 was actually done by the developer who's here today on this application, correct?
I don't know who physically did the survey.
It's presented by the same developer in 2010 as is here today, correct?
I believe so.
Right.
That's my understanding.
Now, a developer, without meaning criticism of developers, obviously in presenting a major plan has some incentive, if possible, to downplay the number of trees being lost.
excuse me one second. Let the record show that Mr. Cardoza has joined the board and that Council President had joined the board earlier, and Ms. Yamilet has the timing. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Portia, I've been listening and watching the entirety of this cross-examination. So.
Okay, we'll have something for you to sign.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Makes for good listening.
You need to get stuck in traffic in better places.
I will withdraw the other question. It's more a point of advocacy, which I'll use later. It's not necessary to put you through that. What I'd like to ask you is this. Aside from your criticism of this study from 2010, in view of the fact that you don't have any actual documentation from it, are you able to offer any other explanations as to why they would have 60,000 more trees than you found?
It's statistically flawed, so I can't tell you that.
Well,
I
wouldn't
haven't
the
seen-
developer?
I haven't seen the calculations.
60,000 more trees. So it's 2 inches and greater, and then 6 inches and greater. So the 2 inches and greater includes the 20,000 number.
I don't think so. I think it's two categories separate. It's 2 to 6 and
Well,
6 and higher.
inches is greater
It doesn't say
than
it's
2.
six.
Yeah.
Greater.
So it's 40,000 more trees.
Even so,
Right.
I noticed that, but when I read it, it
At
looks like
best.
they're creating two categories. But minimally, there are 40,000 more trees, fair to say. Now, if they're right, and it's 40,000 more or 60,000 more on average, based on the average, that means that your calculation of 6,390 trees to be removed would be wrong, right?
You're asking me a hypothetical. If somebody's right, somebody's wrong. I can't argue with.
Well,
hypothetical.
let's assume, for example, that there are either 40,000 more trees or 60,000 more trees. We know there are at least 40,000 from this study on this chart. If they're right, that means the figure that you've relied on, 6,390 trees to be removed, is wrong.
Again, you're asking, sorry, you asked me a hypothetical, and hypothetically, if one is right, one is wrong. If theirs is right, mine is wrong. If mine is right, theirs is wrong.
Now, you would agree that a developer, I'm not criticizing developers, would generally have an interest in downplaying the number of trees destroyed. Isn't that fair to say?
I can't speak for what a developer would or wouldn't do.
Well, it's good public relations if you're developing to destroy fewer trees than more. That's agreed?
It's a fair argument.
So if the developer presented this study in 2010 showing a vastly larger number of trees than you found, shouldn't we at least give some credence to that as having some reliability, since it really would work against the developer's interest?
I'm sorry, I think we're going outside the realm of where we want to be. Ask him about the trees and about his study. You're asking hypotheticals about who said what in 2010. Let's not go there.
Well, let
please.
me ask it this way, Mr. DeFeo, you say you've worked in forestry and tree matters and tree plans before, right?
Yes.
Generally, would a developer present a study that they didn't have confidence in your experience?
Again, it's the same question with a different,
You've worked with other developers, right? Have you?
I haven't worked with developers. I've usually worked for towns or with environmental commissions, not with not for developers per se on clearing trees. No,
Okay, then I'll move
not done
on.
that.
Thank you, then I'll move on. Now, if it turns out that this study is correct and yours is wrong, that means that the entire premise of this application with respect to trees is vastly understated. Isn't that fair to say?
I'm going to object to that question because the tree count and the tree removal and replacement process that the site plan application adheres to is set forth in the ordinance. So I don't think that is a proper question for Mr. DeFeo.
Well, it's based, he's here to speak in part to the idea of compensating for a certain number of trees by putting deer fencing. But if the actual tree,
Mr. Affron.
but if the actual tree loss is much more, that also calls into doubt a lot of the premises on which Mr. DeFeo's report is
Okay.
based.
Let me think about it.
This law says the planning board has no jurisdiction to override an ordinance.
I'm well aware of that.
So they have to take the ordinance and enforce the ordinance and see if the application that's submitted is in keeping and matches up to the ordinance. What it
Lem-
sounds like, and I may be incorrect, but what it sounds like you're trying to do is to prove that the ordinance should never have been passed. And that's not for this board to say.
That wasn't actually in my mind.
Okay, well, the point is that they have to take the ordinance the way it is and
Well, let me do it
and
differently.
apply it.
Let me do it differently. Mr. DeFeo, the ordinance refers to the number of trees that can be lost on this proposal, doesn't it?
I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but go ahead.
Well, Mr. Plucker just said we're dealing with the ordinance. The figure of lost trees is in the ordinance. Is that correct?
I don't have the ordinance in front of, I'm not
Let me put
expert
it
on the
differently.
ordinance.
Let me put it differently. That figure of lost trees is based on your average of 212 trees per acre. Isn't that correct?
I don't have the ordinance in front of me. I
I
can't.
didn't ask you that. I just asked you another question. I heard you don't have the ordinance, so I'm moving on.
Pre-study was provided to the township and part of the negotiation. That's all I know. I can't speak to whether the specifics of an ordinance not in front of me, I can't speak to.
He asked you.
I asked you,
He asked you math.
I asked you a different question.
Ask me, go ahead.
You agree, and it's referenced in your own papers, that there'll be 6,390 trees destroyed by the project. Isn't that correct?
I believe the initial removal, I believe that's correct. I don't have my slide in front of me, but I believe that's correct.
Now, that's based on an average figure of 212 trees per acre of disturbance. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I've testified to that before, yes.
Now, to the extent that's in the ordinance, for example, that figure is based on your 212 per acre calculation, correct?
Correct, which is the highest number of the various ranges we have.
But if your study's wrong and the 2010 study is right, then the actual number of lost trees to be destroyed will be much higher. Isn't that fair to say?
If the math is different, then the math is different, correct?
Okay.
The math is the math. What variables you put in the formula determine the outcome.
So if they have 2 or 3 times more trees on the site calculated, and they're right, that means the average lost trees will probably be closer to 15,000 rather than 6,390.
Well, seeing as this is a statistically flawed study, I do not think they're right. But if their math is correct, Obviously, the math is the math. You put in a variable, the variable gives you a result. You change the variable, the result changes.
So if their study is right, that means there could be a lot more trees lost than you've been using and relying on, right?
If their math is correct, then there would be a higher tree removal theoretically per acre of the survey. You're correct.
I didn't actually ask if the math was correct. I simply put a point to you. If their study is right, then there are going to be a lot more lost trees than you've been using, correct?
But their study is predicated on math. So their math has to be correct for their math to be correct. Their variables and inputs to do the calculations for total trees, the variables they enter must be correct. If they're wrong, then it's wrong.
I will move on. It's not my purpose in life to beat the horse dead. I will move on. Now, what's interesting to me is that you knew about the 2007 plan when you did your own tree report. Isn't that correct?
This document, 03,
Somewhat I asked you.
I'm asking you.
I'm asking you a question. You knew about the 2007 development proposal from the developer,
Oh, yes,
I
I
think-
knew there were prior development proposals. Yes.
and you even knew there was a 2007 proposal, correct?
I couldn't speak to the year, but I knew there was a prior one. Yes. Top of my head, I couldn't speak to the year.
Well, it's actually, excuse me. It's in your West Essex Highland Affordable Housing Development 2023 presentation. You recall that, right?
As I said, I knew there were prior plans. I just couldn't speak to the exact year off the top of my head.
Okay. And in that document, you refer and you actually put on a site plan for 2007 housing development on this site, correct?
Show me the document, which one that is, sure. I've done several presentations. I'm not sure which.
Mr.
one.
Efron, are you entering that into that document into the record? One sec.
I don't.
Did you identify it though, so we know? That you're holding on to
there were two-
something.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
sorry, it's very difficult to work with this. too.
It's okay.
Know what you want.
Sure.
Mr. DeFeo, I'm showing you what we'll mark as the 04. And it's headed, as I said, the West Essex Highland Affordable Housing Development 2023 presentation in a public information presented by Wayne DeFeo, lead AP, Environmental Compliance Officer, West Orange. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And if
Okay,
you look at-
we need the description better because you went really fast.
I apologize.
Give a copy to
Okay.
Gemma, so we can.
Please.
The document is headed West Essex Highlands Affordable Housing Development 2023. And it has some other text, but then towards the bottom, it says Public Information Session, May 10th, 2023, presented by Wayne DeFeo, Environmental Compliance Officer, West Orange. Sorry, I spoke too quickly.
Thank you.
Let me just show, Mr. DeVal, can I just show this?
Do you have an extra copy then?
I think we do. I can give you this one and we can.
Okay, good.
You, you,
Is
sup-
this part of the
Mr.
doc, is this
Mr.
part of the
Pl- Mr.
document
Blocker.
posted?
No,
Yeah.
It's not. Okay, I just wanted.
So.
no, this is from a prior.
Mr. Heffron, before you give it to Gemma, if you would give it to the applicant's attorney to take a look so he can see what you're
I don't think it's.
examining.
Sorry. This is.
Yeah, it's not in.
Mr. Plucker has a good point. This will help us identify it. Was this presentation the one you made at the hotel? Do you
It
recall?
appears to be. I don't have it in front of me, but that would be roughly the date I recall.
Okay.
At 2023.
It looks like a PowerPoint. Most things are PowerPoints nowadays. It looks like one.
Yeah, no, it's a PowerPoint if I did it.
I really only have one page I want to show the witness though.
What's the date on? Is it just 2023?
No, it says May 10, 2023.
May 2023. We
May
did a public
10, 20
information, I think to help, I mean, the mayor asked to do a public information
Yeah,
presentation.
That's exactly what it says.
Okay, so you only want one page?
I just want to ask you a question about one page. Yeah.
So what are we marking as O4? The page or the whole PowerPoint?
Let's mark the cover and the page I'm directing him to. Okay, so it's the first page, which is the cover. I've read that heading out. I'll do it one more time for clarity.
I see. That thing that you read, West Essex Highlands,
Maybe I should read it again.
Housing 2023 Public Information Session, May 10th, 2023, was the
Correct.
page that you were looking at?
This is the cover of the
Okay,
document.
cover, and then what's the page that you're referencing?
The page I'm
Hopefully it's numbered. It's not sure. That'd be too easy.
That's what that is.
The page I'm referencing in the upper left corner says a site plan history spanning 20 years, efforts to protect the forest. Under that, it says year 2007 plans, equal sign, single family homes, site fully developed. That's a description. Yes. And I'm just showing the witnesses one page. So.
And if we could, just for the record, Mr. Bagel, Chairman Bagel, if
Right.
Mr. Afrin can provide whatever he's marking as the exhibit, which is the cover page and the particular page he's referring to, if he could just disseminate that after the hearing at some point via email, so we all have the exhibit.
Of course.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Efron. Thank you, Mr. Plow.
So
Okay.
if I don't mean to crowd you, if you don't mind.
No.
So I'm standing next to the
I
witness.
assume you took a shower.
So this is a 2007 development plan for this project, for this property, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and that was in your May 10, 2023 report, which you gave in terms of your general discussions.
yes,
Okay, thank you. So at the time you prepared your tree report in this case, you were well aware that the developer had actually produced plans for a single-family home project in 2007. Is that fair to say?
yes.
And in spite of that, when you did your tree report, you did not bother to ask the developer for copies of the reports they did on a tree survey at that time.
Number one, I did not see the entire application, so no, I wouldn't have asked for those plans because I was advised that those plans were no longer valid. Therefore, to refer to them was meaningless.
I wasn't
I did
asking
look
you
at
if,
one drawing just to show the differential between high density housing and that type of plan.
well, you knew that in any development plan, there'd have to be a tree removal plan proposed, right?
Well, there'd have to be something proposed, but I don't know how far along that whole set went. I never saw the entire set of drawings.
So even though you were aware of the 2007 submission, you did not ask for a tree study that was produced by the developer at that time. Is that
No,
correct?
because I wouldn't have taken anything provided by the developer at all. I was asked to do an independent study. So I wouldn't want to see prior because it would have been prejudice.
You wouldn't want to be prejudiced by other information.
Correct.
Getting close. You would agree that under the tree ordinance in effect today in West Orange, there actually has to be a tree plan identifying each tree and its species with an exact location that is to be destroyed.
I'm not certain what ordinance is currently in effect in West Orange. I know there was discussion of a new tree ordinance a year ago, I believe. Within the last year. I don't know which ordinance is currently in effect in West Orange.
You haven't read the latest ordinance, is that fair to
No.
say?
That's fair. As it currently, I don't even know if it's been adopted. If there's an ordinance adopted, I read some early drafts, but that's all I looked at.
Well, in those early drafts, it did require that there be a detailed tree removal plan identifying each tree and its species and the location. Do you
I
recall
really
that?
Don't recall the details of that,
Okay.
of those old drafts. I don't recall them.
Okay, so sitting here today, you don't recall what was adopted into law in the current tree ordinance?
That's correct.
How is the current tree ordinance relevant? I'm sorry to object, but obviously it doesn't apply to us. We have our own tree removal and replacement provisions in this zoning ordinance.
I'm glad Mr. Plaka raised the question because it does get to a point we're going to face. The tree ordinance is a mandate of DEP, which acts under its authorizing statute. Enactments in the state that are a product of statute as opposed to ordinance follow the time of decision rule, not the time of application rule. And therefore, since the tree ordinance is mandated for each community by DEP, and DEP is acting under its statutory powers, a fair argument lies in the fact that the application is governed by this new ordinance because it follows the time of decision rule. In addition, any ordinance that is a public health, safety, and welfare measure under MUL 455D-10.5 is in fact, 50-10.5, is in fact time of decision, not time of application. And so if the tree ordinance that's in effect, one, flows from the statutory power of DEP, then it follows the time of decision rule and it is binding on this application. Alternately, if it is a public health, safety, and welfare measure, as it actually says in its text, then it also binds this application because in such case, it follows the time of decision rule. And this is an issue we will be raising as we go further in the case.
Statute 55.
I believe it's, I wrote it down before, MLUL 40:55 D- and I believe it's 10.5. I may have cited it wrong, but I believe that's correct. And so our position is that the new tree ordinance governs and binds this application. Now, I'll ask one or two more questions, Mr. DeFeo, but if you don't recall the contents of the ordinance, just tell me and I'll move on. Okay. Now, you recall under the present tree ordinance in effect that no development project may destroy trees closer than 100 feet to a ridge line.
I really can't answer any questions on this ordinance. I've not read the detailed new ordinance. I don't know.
Then I will hold those questions for another opportunity with another witness. Perhaps. Mr. Chairman, if I may just have a moment, I'm checking my notes. Mr. DeFeo, if I was to ask you any specific questions about requirements in the current tree ordinance, would your answer be the same, that you're not familiar with its contents at this point?
Correct. I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I will hold the remainder of those questions on that point because the witness says he's not currently familiar with its contents. So there's no purpose in my going forward on those questions.
Yeah.
Yes. The witness says he's.
To come back.
No, I don't think that's necessary at this point. I would have liked to get answers, but if he's not familiar with it at this point.
Fine. I just want to make sure that you're not requesting that he return yet another day.
Well, let me put it this way. We will use our own experts for those purposes. And it's possible Mr. DeFeo on his own or through the board's desire may want to come back.
Understood.
But I don't think we need to bring him back just for that. The ordinance speaks for itself. If it applies, it speaks for itself. I don't need to make Mr. DeFeo go out of his way to come back.
Got a couple of questions, Chairman. Is that all right?
Not till he's done.
Oh,
Okay.
I thought he was done. Oh,
Is,
Hang on.
I thought he said.
I just need 2 or 3 minutes to make sure I'm done.
No problem.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true.
I do have one question, Mr. DeFeo. If you're presently the town's environmental compliance officer,
That's the title under which I submit my proposal, yes.
this particular proposal.
No,
Oh, so what do you mean? I'm sorry.
the environmental compliance officer proposal works on ensuring compliance at the Environment Center where the composting and recycling is collected. My contract there is to inspect it and ensure that it meets compliance with state regulations.
So when you say you're the environmental compliance officer, as you did on the 04, you mean only with respect to that limited function?
Well, I get called in under that title to do other items as necessary that deal with environmental issues. If there's an environmental question that pertains to an area that the township believes I can be helpful, I'm called in under that title, yes.
I'm not trying to make light of anything, and please don't assume I'm trying to be sarcastic. I don't mean to be. Trees are a fundamental part of the environment. We would all agree, correct?
I would say that trees are a fundamental part of the environment. I agree with you, yes.
We've reached a point of agreement. Now, wouldn't you think as the environmental compliance officer, noting that trees are a large part of that general subject area, that you should have read the town's tree ordinance?
I read the drafts of the town's tree ordinances when asked to read them for very specific comment. But I'm not the town forester. And I do not deal with the tree ordinance. I've not been called in to deal with it, so I haven't had a reason to look at it.
Did it occur to you that the current tree ordinance might be relevant to this application?
Not to me, because this ordinance was adopted prior. I was
Did-
working under the negotiated settlement system.
Well, did someone say to you that the new ordinance does not apply, the old ordinance does?
My work was completed prior to the new ordinance, so it wouldn't have been anything to have come up in discussion.
But you knew there was a new ordinance because you read the drafts, is that correct?
I know there was one being considered.
And you
I
didn't,
didn't know what was ultimately going to be adopted. I wasn't part of that process.
and before you issued your report here and your testimony, you didn't think it necessary to look at that ordinance?
My reports were issued prior to my reading even the draft of the new ordinance. I had no idea if there was going to be one adopted. My
Well-
initial reports. Sorry.
Well, your report,
Years ago.
your report dated October 16th,
I thought you meant the
2024.
pre-order. I think you meant my pre-study. I'm sorry.
Oh, your tree study, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, you came here and testified over the last several weeks, and that was after the May 2024 adoption of the current tree ordinance. And you issued a report dated October 16, 2024, and that was also after the date of adoption. Now, didn't it occur to you to see whatever happened to those drafts that you read, to see whether they entered into law before you testified?
No.
Why not?
In all
Just not
fairness,
relevant to the document.
sorry, in all fairness, our zoning ordinance says that this application, unless specifically stated in the IH zoning ordinance that applicable here, that we are exempt from every regulation in the West Orange land use ordinance. It says it in our ordinance.
I understand that, and the ordinance does say that, and also the new tree ordinance was taken out of the land use ordinances, so this board doesn't have any,
It's not in chapter
it's not
25
in chapter
anymore.
25 anymore, so it's not part of the land use review.
It's a general ordinance. under the-
Right,
under
but
the
it's
code.
not part of the land use
Well, it's-
ordinances any longer.
Well, but any application for development is governed by whatever tree ordinance is enforced in
No,
the general
it's been
ordinances.
removed from the land use ordinances.
I can tell you that it specifically states that no application for development will destroy trees closer than 100 feet to
And I
original.
can tell you that it's not in chapter 25, which is the land use ordinances that the board has to review to see whether they're being complied with or if there's an issue with it.
I understand the point, Ms. McGovern, but I would differ only in that if there's a general ordinance, it still governs the developer's actions.
But we're also saying there's a tree ordinance for this zone
Right.
that precedes the latest ordinance that was taken out of chapter
And-
25.
Granted, and if the latest ordinance is a product of statute or is a public health, safety, and welfare measure, it binds this application.
So you're arguing public safety, health and welfare, which is the ordinance was never challenged in the IH1 zone. So we're using that because it was never challenged. So are
I
you
understand.
challenging the ordinance?
It's not a matter of challenging the ordinance, it's a later ordinance that supersedes it. Council spoke and passed another tree ordinance, and that tree ordinance governs everything in this town. That's the point.
Not the way the ordinance was written. But this is not
It's
the.
a legal issue.
Exactly right. This is not the
Legal issue.
venue to discuss it, but thank you very much for bringing that to our attention.
It will come up again.
I'm sure it will.
So I just want to be, so Mr. DeFeo, I asked you a question. I'm not sure if you had a chance to answer because we had this colloquy. Just to be fair, why didn't you think it necessary to check to see what happened to the draft ordinance?
I didn't think it was not relevant to the as far as I understood it, it wasn't relevant to the work that I had done because it was after the fact.
Thank you. I'm corrected by Professor Trachtenberg, who says it was adopted June 10. I believe it was adopted in May, but it is adopted at some point. We have no further questions. I thank Mr. DeFeo for his patience
Thank you.
through these 2 days. Mr. Chairman, at this point, we have nothing further at this stage. I know Mr. Plucker does not either.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Klein, you wanted to ask a question?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So
Who are you asking a question of?
I'm going to ask it and then you can buzz in if you know the answer. So if say it's either between roughly, I'm just going to use round numbers, between 6,000 trees that could possibly be disturbed and removed, as many as 15,000 trees removed or disturbed, somewhere in between. Are we going to actually count the number of trees that are removed when they actually, if they were to approve this and they were to do construction, will they count the number of trees 4 inches or greater, or whatever the number is, and quantify it and say, yeah, 60, 103?
As a rule, no, the answer would be that what we would be depending on who ultimately does that work.
Right.
The monitor that is used would primarily be concerned to make certain that tree removal does not exceed the area of disturbance.
Okay,
So
so
it'd be looking at the
limits,
perimeter,
all right.
not counting every tree internally because it's just not feasible and they're going to be removed.
Actually, with respect, we have a different interpretation of the current ordinance. I know there's a dispute about what may apply. If the current ordinance applies, it actually requires exactly what you asked, that each tree, its species, and its location be marked before destruction. And I've actually seen development plans that do precisely that. And so the current ordinance does require exactly what you asked.
Right, so then if it's only 6,000, the way you say it, then your replacement numbers will work. If it turns out that it's a higher number, what would be the replacement, or what would be the mitigation if it were to be 3, 4, 5,000, 6,000 more trees than actually you estimated?
I defer to legal for that kind of an answer.
No, I get- well, no,
I just don't know. I don't.
No, all right, so it's more of a technical question for you. If you came up with a way, a certain
Yeah.
amount of deer fence, and that
Right.
equivalent
Okay. I follow
equates to
what you're saying
6.
now. Okay.
What if it's double that? What if it's 12,000 trees?
All you said before, you plug the numbers.
Right, and then how much, is there enough area to make deer fence to be able to mitigate the extra 3, 4, 6,000
There
trees?
really isn't much more room. I mean, theoretically, more deer fencing could be put in, but we had this discussion, I know, early on, and the problem with putting more deer fencing in fundamentally is the wetlands. So you get
Right,
to the
you can't
point
go
where
that
you
route.
start getting into disturbing wetlands, which is infinitely worse than anything else that's going to happen in
Okay.
the area of disturbance. So
We would also say-
problem.
We would also say that becomes a somewhat synthetic device to add more fencing so that we free the developer from planting more trees. So at some point, you can't just put fences up just to prevent the developer from the high cost of planting new trees.
Oh, right, it's a combination of deer fencing and planting new trees.
They have to put in new
Right.
trees according to their plan.
Okay,
They have to use native species.
okay,
And then the idea of that, of course, is that what that does over time is helps to populate, especially the deer fenced area.
Right.
With seedlings.
okay. So they could plant around the perimeter of their disturbance, right, on the edge of the, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what their final landscape plan is going to look like, where the trees will go exactly.
I'm saying could they always throw in a few more trees
We
to
could,
make it?
the chairman, in fact, asked this question, I believe, I don't know how many hearings ago, because I've lost track. Could the developer, and I believe I put it in a supplemental report, get seedlings from the state to help speed the process.
Right.
My answer was, I believe it was last year or the year before, there were no trees available due to different conditions. The state didn't have them. The short answer is yes, there is availability of seedlings from the state projected, and they could do that.
But that would be inside the deer fence. I'm talking about just on the, well, bad
Yeah,
video, but
outside the area.
just on the edges of disturbance. They've disturbed, they try not to take down too many trees. And now that there's this clear area in between a building or a parking lot
Right.
and the existing trees, they could fill in some more if they had to.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful when you're planting in there's buildings, obviously,
right.
but one of the elements, if you may recall, in one of my reports was a recommendation that we do a GIS type study using a satellite type imagery where we could identify trees of a certain size that maybe we could save
Okay.
within that disturbed area because they have some unique characteristic. And that might be a condition that would help to reduce that number further.
Okay. And then my other question is, in your opinion, what is the impact of removing mature trees or
Mhm.
trees in general within 100 feet of a ridge line?
I'm sorry, I was distracted by a client's question, which
That's
is
stupid,
proper.
yeah.
I couldn't hear your question. If you could repeat it.
It was for him, but yeah, it's,
I know.
my question is, in your opinion, Mr. DeFeo, what's the impact, I guess, on the ridge or on the slope of the ridge if you remove trees within 100 feet of a ridge line?
To generalize things like that are very dangerous because it depends on the ridge line. It
Okay.
depends on the geology. It depends on where the tree is. It depends on how it's growing.
So can you give me a
Generally, you
range
wouldn't
of,
want to do any kind, generally you try to avoid removal if you can.
right?
But if you can't, then you just want to be sure that you have some side of a stable system. One of the elements that, well, this drawing is useless. One of the elements of trying to use the deer fencing the way we designed it was to minimize the impact on that ridge line because everything to the east
Right.
of that ridge line will regenerate faster within the deer fencing
Okay.
and mitigate any of the impact. Normally on the steep ridge line, your concern is runoff.
Right.
So we're trying to increase plant growth in the direction of runoff that's native there.
Okay.
And also the understanding, as I understand the site plan, and I'm not the site engineer, the design, as it was explained, as I heard it, the stormwater on that ridge line in the impacted area, the cleared area, will be directed away from the ridge going
the
west
west,
and
okay.
south. I believe that's south, right? South and
Yeah,
west.
is right, correct, yeah.
That's as I understood the engineer.
Okay.
So my thinking and my working and negotiating with this, of course, is let's increase the understory growth, more plants, more water absorption. So even though you have this ridge here, anything falling here goes this way, anything falling there goes that way. I'm worried about what's going that way.
Right, and that's the deer fence side, and
That's
that's
the
the
deer
more
fence
dense
side on
growth
that
to
side.
absorb more water and runoff and things. Okay.
Could I add something to some of the questions you had?
Saffron. All right.
First of all, under the current ordinance, and it may well be under the early one as well, but under the current ordinance, it's a 1-for-1 tree replacement. There's no correct,
Diameter or just?
no. If you remove, I'll read off to you. If you remove a tree
We're
4 to
we're gonna
6
hold off on
inches.
that ordinance because we don't know that's operative right now.
Well, I just want to, I won't go into the details. I'll say this, there's different categories of radius, of diameter. But it's a 1-for-1 replacement with a tree, generally 2.5 inches in diameter for each of the size classes. But the tree must be 6 feet high. So it's not a matter of little seedlings. Right. It's a 6-foot-high tree that has to be replaced. It's
Right, I think we were
1-for-1.
talking about two different things. Seedlings inside the fenced-in deer area so that they'll grow because the deer won't eat the seedlings. On the outside, it's got to be a little more mature so the deer, if they do start eating it, it'll still grow.
Correct. And I just want to clarify,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what Mr. DeFeo meant, but the current law says it must be a 6-foot-high minimum.
Okay.
And it's a 1-for-1 replacement. So in order to do one, now let's assume there's 15,000 to be lost, assuming that theory is right. That means the developer's got to put in another 8,500 trees. That's an enormous cost. And so that's our
But we're
point.
talking,
that if-
at this moment, we're talking about a hypothetical, so let's stop right there. It's a hypothetical. There's-
The other thing I'll just add in is that the actual current law does require that exact tree plan, the specific location of each tree to be removed, and it's species,
I don't know where this came.
it's species and
Land
diameter.
use.
So the new law is much more rigid. The current law, I'll say, is much more rigid than Mr. DeFeo says we're working under. So that's a distinction in
This
position.
was an affordable housing inclusionary development that is entitled to certain deference, to certain elimination of cost generative items. Look at the affordable housing regulations. You want to cite the law for a future quarter, wherever you want to go, that's fine, Bruce. But there's a reason that those regulations exist. And when the town recognized that in the settlement, which was approved by the court, the settlement had this zoning ordinance attached to it, which was approved by the court at a fairness hearing, which was adopted by the governing body of this town and was not objected to.
I would respond and say it can be looked at completely differently. That this developer is getting the privilege to build 396 market rate units on a site where he can only build 136 houses. And at the price for the developer getting that privilege is the no, hang on, but Mr. Plaka is testifying. Too. I just want to make a point in response to what Mr. Plaka said. It is not a matter that because it's giving some affordable housing, we give them special breaks. The affordable housing is the price the developer pays for the privilege to put 396 luxury units on a site that would carry only 136 single-family homes.
Done.
Which
Thank
would
you.
have disturbed a lot more of that property.
Gentlemen,
Which-
gentlemen,
We're done.
thank you.
We have concluded our presentation unless anyone has any questions that require me to weigh in.
Thank you. We're done. Okay, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. I'm sorry, Council President, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is for you, Mr. DeFeo, or you, Mr. Afrin. Just have a couple of questions as I was listening to the testimony. The 2010 study had 182 trees per acre of 6-inch diameter or greater. I do recall earlier in your presentation, Mr. DeFeo, you had broken out the size of the trees per acre. Can you help me understand where you are with 6 inches or greater? The number per acre, if you have that?
Yeah, the blue bars, yeah, that's it. Yep.
I have to find, I don't have it in front of me. Hang on. I'd have to find my study. If I even have it with me.
If you have the actual study when we break, could I take a look at it, please? Because I've never seen it.
Might just be the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
The PowerPoint has the histogram in it, as I
You
recall.
want my copy here?
I do have a current.
That's the history.
All right, Counselor, if I use this copy?
Yeah.
We used a 4 to 8 inch range, so it's like I'm comparing kind of an I'm not comparing apple to apple with that. But in the 4 to 8 inch range, we would have come up with, it's about 70 trees.
So
In that
70
size range per acre.
4 to 8 inch was 70 trees per acre?
We have 4 to 8, yeah.
Okay, what about
So it's
8
tough
and
to
above?
compare 6, it's a big range in
Do
it.
you have anything above 8 inches?
Yes, we have trees in the 8 to 12 range, and we went 12 to 16, 16 to 20, and the numbers drop these are the number of trees we found in the areas. So we went from 70 in 4 to 8, 8 to 12, we dropped to 30. Then we dropped 12 to 16, you drop to 10. Below 10, when you get above 16, 20, you're getting down to 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, thank you. That's a little better for me to see. So you just see as you get bigger and bigger, which is not unusual, by the way, that as you get really big trees, 36-inch diameter trees, that's a big tree.
Mhm.
So you see fewer and fewer of that kind of tree in any forest.
If we were to add up all of the trees 4 inches or greater, can we get a number for that so that we can compare it to the 6 inch or greater that was in the earlier study?
Let me look and see. Again, because you're doing different ranges, because they use a 2 to 6, which is an inaccurate range to work with in the first place. It's not an accurate study in that regard. So you say 2 to 6, I've got to eliminate everything up between 2 and 3.99.
I'd be fine with 4. I'd be fine with
I can
4 inches and high.
I couldn't do it off the top of my head.
So I'd like to know what your study showed in total number of trees or average number of trees per acre, 4 inches or greater.
So you want to compare what was theoretically exhibited as a prior study against these findings and see if there's any difference. Is my understanding you correctly?
Correct.
Or what the difference is.
Because, well, he doesn't have it by 6.
Either or.
If you have it by 6 inch, that would be great, but if not, I'm happy to kind of adjust the math.
I can try. I can't promise what I can come up with, but I can try for you, certainly.
All right, thank you. I mean, there should be a way to do it if you were able to put it on a histogram. You
Yeah, I'm
should
just
be able
not
to-
sure of its accuracy. That's all I can tell you
Okay.
right now. I just don't know.
Okay.
When that's done, we'd appreciate a copy at the time it's posted, sent to me if we could.
All right, second question I have is I'm a little unclear about the forest, the characterization of the forest. Is it a stagnant forest or a stable forest or not?
Well, I suppose it depends who you talk to. In my professional opinion, this is what I would call a stagnant, non-regenerating forest. That means that as time continues, using that histogram as an example, regardless of the numbers.
Right, you're gonna see fewer and
Hey.
fewer small.
The problem is your smaller trees, when they get above that, when they get to that 4-inch category and above, they're gonna be okay. The problem is when you forget the 2-inch and below, the seedling loss, rate of seedling loss is so substantial. And then virtually, if you had a chance to look at a number of the supplementals, I know you have nothing else to do with your time, but if you ever get a chance to read all that stuff, you'll see there are a number of studies that show forests like this. And the reason they call them stagnant is because you don't get the replacement of the older dying trees with the seedlings. Whatever's in that range is what you got. And then when I say a forest is stagnant and unhealthy, understand you and I may not be on this earth by the time this forest degenerates to some level. When we talk about forests, I'm talking 100-year windows, not 5-year windows. So I'm looking at a long-term health of a forest over long periods. So to answer your question, what will happen is if you don't get that seedling growth, if that continues to occur, as it's been doing where you're getting deer eating it and other animals, then you're going to have a number of negative environmental impacts, not just trees. And we keep focusing on trees, but what happens in a forest like that, your small game species decrease, your bird species decrease, because not all birds live in the top of trees. A lot of birds live in the lower ends of the shrubs. There are no shrubs to speak of that birds like. There are shrubs there, but it's not healthy. So you start to destroy the ecological diversity of the entire forest over time, which is why I call it stagnant and unhealthy. Stable to me would mean I have a regeneration rate that's comparable to a death rate, and therefore I have a forest that is continuing to evolve and be healthy with young trees replacing old trees.
Got it.
I have a
Understood.
quick, oh, sorry.
Okay. All right, now, going back to this rolling mean methodology that you spoke about earlier, is there a certain minimum percentage of the sample size that needs to be considered before you can make a conclusion?
It generally is what we use here is a 2.5% to 3%. You can usually start to do that.
Well, what I mean by that is you had
2 to 3%.
55 or 50 plus sites
Oh, I follow
randomized.
what you're saying.
Right, so do you have to use half of the sample size? You have to use a quarter, a third?
We
before you
generally
can
go
make
to
a
about
conclusion?
half. We went to 22 out of 55. Again, at that point, you run the rolling mean. And then you say
So about 40%.
about 40 to 50% of it. Yeah, it's in that range. You start running the numbers, and as the numbers just continuously don't change, you say, okay, at what point does it become an exercise and let's just go out and spend more time in the forest, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a wonderful way to spend my time, but is not necessarily the most efficient way to get good data.
Understood. I just wanted to get what that number, what that percentage of the sample size.
Yeah, and can I ask you just to go back, because I want to make sure I get what you want correct? You want me to compare the histograms, if you will, or the number breakdowns. Theirs is not in a histogram on that old chart, I
Correct.
realize. But compare our numbers against the older numbers and see what we come up against.
Correct. What I'd like to know is, they presented 6 inches and greater, 182 trees per acre. I would like to know a comparable number from your study.
Okay, no problem. I'll do what I can with it for you.
All right. This question is really for the board attorney. Does the DEP statute supersede the settlement agreement or the governing ordinance?
Well,
for the-
I'm gonna stop right there. The DEP has nothing to do with, DEP will weigh in on this application when they apply to the DEP. We have nothing to do with that. This is outside the purview of the board.
All right, so as I listened to the testimony, Mr. Afrin made an assertion. He made that assertion in response to what Mr. DeFeo was testifying. My understanding of that as a board member was, even though the governing ordinance for this particular project allows the applicant to ignore the tree ordinance.
Well, it doesn't
That-
ignore the tree ordinance. There is a tree ordinance in place, so it's not ignored.
Well, ignore
clear.
the current tree ordinance, right?
There's an update- there's another tree ordinance. And there's a tree ordinance for the zone. So let's be clear. So the attorneys will argue this out in a different venue.
All right, so.
We'll
we're
argue
playing
here too.
semantics here.
Right.
What I'm saying is the ordinance that they have in this settlement agreement that we've got some clarity on, do we call it a settlement agreement or governing order,
Ordinance.
whatever it is, that may not actually govern if there is something at a state level that supersedes. That's all I'm trying to understand.
That's correct.
Because we can't,
That's correct.
okay, so the DEP would supersede whatever it is we can't violate what they would want us.
That's correct. But they would have to weigh in on it after we have decided.
And that's your
And-
position, board attorney?
Yeah, the DEP, their rule supersedes anything that you all want to do or might have done, but they applied for the DEP at the time that they did, and I know that whatever standards were required at the time that they applied are what apply. That's typically what happens, and I believe that that's what we
Well, that's
already.
the
No,
follow-up.
with
We already
respect,
got, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
We already got confirmation, I believe, well, you're not Mr. Hess, but Mr. Hess had indicated and confirmed when he was here, our engineer, that the DEP rules that were in place and the stormwater management were on the date of this application, and that's the guidelines that they have to follow.
So that was a follow-up question, right? Because if they do govern, my understanding of Mr. Afrin's questioning today was that it's a time of decision, not a time of application,
I understand that was Mr. Afrin's
assertion,
assertion, but. I
and that may
believe-
not be accurate.
Well, I think that the DEP has already issued something that Mr. Hess had reported to us and confirmed that the DEP was taking the position that the stormwater management rules that were in place at the time are in place for this application.
That was stormwater.
Yes,
What we're talking about right now,
there are trees.
trees.
That's our personal ordinance that you're referring to, and this location has its own personal specific tree ordinance.
Right, now we're getting into circular arguments because what,
No, I see what you're saying. No, I do. And the DEP, I don't believe weighed in on anything to do with the trees. with
and
respect
are
to
they
this.
going to at some point?
No, I don't think they have any jurisdiction over trees. That's our specific local ordinance.
Okay.
I can state for the record that any required DEP permits were applied for and they were granted.
Oh, you have the record, so they've
Yeah,
already been
d-
granted their DEP.
Yes, stormwater, extension of LOI, I believe they are on file with the town.
May I just weigh in for one moment? On the stormwater issue and the question of which set of rules govern, the older rule or the new rule, DEP did, as Ms. McGovern just said, rule that the old rule applies. We are appealing that and we'll be asking for an adjudicatory hearing on the issue. And later there'll be an appeal to the appellate division. That's an issue that's not resolved, but it's not for this board.
Exact.
Right.
And that's the point.
I'm
right?
satisfied
So,
with that.
so we can't, we're not discussing that. We're not overruling DEP. We cannot do that.
Our point only is that with respect to trees, which is not really a direct DEP adjudicatory area, there is a rule that came about because of a statutory mandate. And in our view, that means the time of decision governs, not the time of
So-
application.
so
We-
This is a
that's a
minor
legal-
argument
Right.
that is not related at this, after you do your experts, I get it. You're gonna have that argument for the board and it'll culminate in, I think, closing arguments, probably.
Well, we'll bring it out through our own experts anyway to show the differences. But also, we think it governs the board, but it's an argument that the board has to decide for itself. And
Well,
if we
your
disagree, and there might be
experts
later
have to be
hearings. Right.
submitted to establish which of, if in fact.
Well, if there's no difference, then it wouldn't matter. So we intend to show there is a difference between the two.
There's a number of things that have to be
Right.
looked at.
Exactly.
My last question was with regard to the 2010 study, the 3 areas that were studied. Is it possible to get an overlay of the current proposed project versus those areas that were studied so we could see how much, if any of it, is actually in the proposed area of disturbance?
We'd have to have someone do a CAD and put them to the same scale. It takes a little time to
That's up to
do.
the applicant. I'm sorry, that's up to the objector. That's up to the objector.
Yeah,
They so choose to
well,
do that.
I obviously can't force Mr. DeFeo to do it. We can look into it. If it's
I
cost
would like to
prohibitive.
know, and I'm not trying to add run-up costs for anyone. I just would like to know how applicable that 2010 study is to this particular project now. The numbers to me are concerning. They're different than what we've been presented. And if they are applicable, I'd like to know. If they're not applicable, then, you know, it has a lot less weight.
We offer it for the simple proposition that we have two sets of numbers, Mr. DeFeo's study and this earlier study. Regardless of what you're developing, the forest is the forest. So if one study says you've got 212 per acre, another says almost 3 times as much, we say you have two different forests and there's a question to resolve. I don't think the development itself matters, but what we're saying is that this, from the developer, this is an admission by the developer. It's the developer's own tree study. It's submitted here in an earlier plan. It's the same forest. So we're saying that it doesn't matter what the development is now versus then. The trees are the same. And
So
so,
I understood that argument and accept that argument, right? Because we actually had a sidebar. I understand that argument and accept that argument. In addition to that, I would still like to see how much of that studied area was in the area of disturbance, if possible. If it's not an
Right.
easy thing to do, then, you know.
we will ask our engineers to do it. The trouble is, and I mean no disrespect to any engineers in the room, sometimes you ask that and there's a $7,000 bill that comes for doing the
I
calc.
get it. So.
So,
don't
we'll
go
try.
to the-
Yeah. Well, and it's a tough thing to do. We'll try to look into it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it.
Could I ask one last question of Mr. DeFeo, referencing something Mr. Rutherford asked? Just to clarify.
You're up, sir.
You're referring to the rolling mean concept, right?
Yes.
That simply means that when you've looked at enough of the spot checks to satisfy yourself that nothing's really changing, you stop and you use the data that you collected up to that point.
Correct.
That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're gonna take a 5-minute break and then we're gonna hear PB 24-06, 410 Main Street. Thank you, Mr.
Chairman,
DeFeo. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Efron.
very much, and we will probably be departing then.
Yeah. But there are parts of that-
Oh. Safe travels.
I think you're all.
Well, it's random in a smaller.
Right.
You're all hired by.
What about, do we need to announce the January 29th?
Pretty.
Oh, you did that already.
Thank you. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen on Zoom. Welcome back to people in the room. PB 24-06, 410 Main Street. Holdings LLC, Block 113, Lot 262, 264, 308, 410 Main Street. Applicant is proposing a three-story mixed-use development with 12 residential dwelling units above ground, parking and commercial space. Mr. Wine for the applicant, and then we're going to hear Mr. Hazel, our planner.
Okay, perfect. So good evening, Chair, members of the board. Nice to actually meet everybody in person. So while it was a little unfortunate we couldn't conclude last week, there's something nice actually about being in person despite my 1 hour drive. So can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll be very brief. I would just respectfully request if there's an opportunity after, you know, Mr. Hazel and your engineer speak, if there's anything for me to address to do so. But very briefly, I did conclude at last week's meeting. I'm here to really remind the board that ultimately this is a conditional use application for everything that the chairman just put on the record. At the end of the day, as I indicated previously in my closing, the uses on this property, everything else other than the conditional use is something that would be standalone retail in some capacity, standalone commercial. I think the members of the public that spoke about really important issues regarding parking on Park Drive, regarding significant traffic increase on Park Drive, regarding pedestrian safety. You heard from our traffic engineer and our planner that every single one of those other uses that's permitted for this particular site would be a horrible, horrible way to honor the public's concern, effectively saying the governing body adopted this conditional use. Certain lots, very specific ones, will meet the standards for that use. This is one of those lots. And here's why it's a good opportunity. When you're talking about a use that has a maximum in the peak hour of 5 vehicles per hour, which is 1 vehicle every 12 minutes circling Park Drive. We also, and I'm not going to go through my closing again, because again, I think I hit all the points and I'm sure the record speaks for itself. But I think when push comes to shove, we have worked with the board for the last approximately 6 months, but even before that, this project began its life as a planning board application. My clients never said, let's go to the zoning board and seek to do a 5-story building, or let's seek to go to the zoning board and seek some other type of use variance here, residential only. The whole point of this application was that it would be a planning board application because your ordinance has conditional use standards for this lot. And we figured, why violate those? We can meet them. Let's meet them. Let's provide a good application on an incredibly challenging site due to the topography, the concern about access off of Main Street from the county. So let's provide a use that is maybe not perfect in everybody's mind, but far and away the best possible use of this site when you compare it to as of right alternatives, which include a 7-Eleven convenience store, a funeral home, things of that nature, all of which we could be before this board asking for not one single variance. But I think it's fair to say would be probably a much greater concern for the public. So really, that's the crux of the application. Again, I'm not going to go over it in detail. I know there are several conditions that we read into the record that would be amenable to us over the course of the hearings. But I think it's worth noting that this was a genesis of an application. There were tens of comments issued by various board members about what they'd like to see in this project. And I think we've addressed every single one of them, from design to green roof to garage warning signals to pedestrian safety concerns. I think we've addressed every single, and then most notably, obviously, providing off-site parking for overflow in the case that it would arrive, despite the traffic testimony that it's unlikely that it would occur. And we've even agreed to work with the county on installing, irrespective of this application, a pedestrian safety crosswalk with a lighted beacon across Main Street at this location. So I think when push comes to shove, this is an application that your ordinance did the right thing in coming up with this use and conditional use standards, which we meet. Unfortunately, the bulk standards are what really did not change from the B2. So a 30% building coverage, for example, is great for a 7-Eleven. You could put a 2,500 square foot 7-Eleven here, no problem, and comply with that. But that doesn't work for a mixed use building, as you heard testimony on. With that, again, I'm not looking to rehash everything that I've said. I know the hour's late, and I know there's another application after me. And really, this is just a plea for everybody on the board to have heard the testimony, listen to the testimony, and understand that at the end of the day, this is the right use for this property. And so we appreciate it. And with that, Chairman, I'll just simply ask that if there's anything that gets addressed to me specifically by any of your professionals or the board members, I'd like the opportunity to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Mr. Hazel, can you give us your input?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen of the board, this application has the distinct honor of being probably one of the first ones that I'm providing you testimony on since I've been with the board. It's a very interesting one, and I think I want to start by where Mr. Wine left off. This is a conditional use this is a conditional use application. In other words, this is in the B2 zone, and the mixed use development is permitted under the ordinance as a conditional use. There's several conditions that the proposed use has to meet to be permitted as of right as a conditional use. And those include the permitted use has to have a permitted, the mixed use development has to have a permitted ground floor use. One or more dwelling units shall be permitted on the upper floors. Access to the upper floors is provided by separate entry. And the minimum lot area for this use would be 5,000 square feet. In this instance, the applicant meets all of these standards, all of these conditions. In case of the lot size, it's actually more than double the minimum required. And I think that's part of where some concern for the project comes in. Would be the largest building in the area. The only building that approaches the size would be the senior citizen building just up the street, and that is set back significantly. So that the size perception is not as readily apparent as this one is. This is right on the street, just opposite to the senior buildings, right on the street. So the size of the massing is right in front of you. But one of the issues that I think got discussed most in this application was the parking. And believe it or not, I think my sense of it is that the parking is in large part driving a lot of this design. A lot of the variances being requested, a lot of the just the appearance of the building itself. It is a large building. To accommodate the parking on the ground floor, to get the necessary depth, and so the building has to really utilize most of the lot. And again, it's a very large lot. So is it a good trade-off for having the parking to have something this size? I looked at the possibility of reducing the number of units, which of course would bring the potential size down. But again, if you're going to provide parking, and I think it's important to understand that if you're going to provide on-site parking, you're not going to lose some of that depth that they're taking. You may be able to pull the building in from the sides, but the edifice itself on the street frontage would remain fairly large. You can increase the setbacks, maybe to even get them on one or two sides conforming. So based on these factors that I'm mentioning, let me just say on the other side that I think this is a good use for the site in terms of the mixed use. I think it's in keeping with what the ordinance, master plan, and the zoning ordinance do envision for this area. It would be an opportunity to spread the commercial activity that's sort of clustered around Harrison Avenue, bring it down the street, which I think is a positive. I think it will also help to enliven that strip. We talked about the strip being very much a speedway. It's a 4-lane roadway in that area, and cars really zoom by. This would help in terms of a mixed use development where there's some activity on the street frontage, would help in calming that a bit. The applicant also spoke about the crossing of the street by utilizing the off-site parking of the church, having the crosswalk there. I think that's a positive too, whether this gets done or not. I think that that's a good idea. Clearly, there needs to be, in my opinion, more of that ability to connect the both sides of Main Street in that area. There's a lot of residential on each side that I think it really would be beneficial to the residents in that area and the city as a whole. So basically where I come down on this is here you have an application that is conforming to the conditional use standards. However, there are quite a few variances are being requested in terms of setbacks. Again, that speaks to the size. A smaller building would be probably more in fitting with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. There's nothing else approaching the size in the area. However, I'm concerned about what the on-site parking what the on-site parking being required is going to do to that, how much it is going to be able to reduce the size of the building. It may mean that if the building size were reduced, you would have less of an opportunity for the number of parking spaces you have, which, as you know, got discussed at length. So essentially, my feeling is that this is a good use here. I think it should be tried to be accommodated here. I am concerned about the size relative to everything else around it. It is significantly larger. I am concerned also about the what it will do on to Park Drive North. I think this will definitely increase the vehicular traffic there. Not to say that it would be of anything of an appreciable level that would cause a substantial detriment to that area, but that street is so narrow already and it's already pretty tight. I think any little bit does impact it. One of the reasons I asked about the potential of having the egress out back onto Main Street, and that definitely got the message. That was definitely not a non-starter. So those are my concerns about this. I do have the concern that the size is large. However, relative to buildings across Park Avenue from it and across Main Street from it, the buildings that appear sort of similar, but they're significantly smaller. And I think the nature of this lot being an elongated lot of this size, it creates some problems, accommodating that parking and utilizing the space that you do have. You have more of a length than depth does reinforce that size factor. So that's kind of where I come down on it. As I said, I do think it's a good use for the site. I think that it will further the what is envisioned in the master plan and the zoning ordinance for this area, elongating and continuing the commercial activity. But I am concerned about the what it will do on Park Avenue North, and again, the relative size to the area fitting into the fabric of the area. Everything is so much smaller.
Okay.
But again, as I cautioned, this is the nature of the site. Unless you subdivided it, it would be very difficult to get something else there that was substantially smaller, especially if you didn't provide on-site parking.
Thank you, Mr. Hazel. Okay, so now the board will deliberate.
Well, Chairman, if I may, or do you want to deliberate first?
I'd like the board to deliberate.
Sure.
And you can hear what we have to say, and then you can answer any questions.
Sure.
Mayor?
So thank you, Mr. Hazel, for that. And Mr. Wine, thank you also, because it seems to me that everything that the board has requested over the past numerous hearings that we've had, you have addressed. I appreciate what Mr. Hazel said about the size of the building, but I'm kind of okay with the size of the building because Edison Lofts is right down the road too. That's directly on the street. There are 330 units there, but they have a parking deck for 642 cars plus 99 for public use. Though the crosswalk, parking concerns, either across the street, the crosswalk with the county, we never did discuss reducing the number of units. I don't remember having that conversation about reducing the number of units to make it a smaller size, to make it more accommodating, because I know I did say to the traffic engineer that the numbers never made sense to me. As far as having parking permits, I would want all the residents to have parking permits, but I don't know that there's enough across the street, and I don't really think people are going to use the municipal lot down the street. So I have always been concerned about the parking and traffic.
Mr. Klein?
I have less concern with the parking and the traffic, being that I guess I'm a traffic engineer and I do this for a living. I don't have a problem with the numbers. I don't have a problem as long as the crosswalk is there to get people across to the church parking lot for the 8 spaces that are required there. I would like to see mayor and council pass a permit parking for Park Street, north, west, south, and even I think Ashwood across the street so that they can manage the parking a little bit better. I had some concerns originally about the southern side of the property, the setback. I looked at the plans a little more carefully. The existing townhouse next door is 7.8 feet off of the property line. The first floor garage is over 5 feet off, so it's over 13 feet away from it on the first floor. And then the second floor has a 10-foot setback, so it's more like 18 feet offset on that side. I don't have a problem with the amount of traffic that's going to be generated to go around the block on Park Drive North, West, and South, because right now the 3 townhomes with the 7 parking spaces next door, those people have to do the same thing. They come around to park that way. I think as long as the landscaping is put in that buffer along the south side of the building and that's maintained, I think that'll work as well. I agree that if it was a commercial property, it could be something like a 7-Eleven, which would certainly generate a lot more traffic. I still don't think you'll ever get a driveway on Main Street because of the bus stop and just the fact that we've got pedestrians walking along Main Street. We don't want to put a driveway there if we have a street right next to it. So, yeah, that's my comments.
Council President Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do thank you, Mr. Wine, for being so receptive to board recommendations. I still do have a problem with the scale of the building, the proximity to actual Main Street, how far back it's set from Main Street itself proper. The issue with crossing, even with the crosswalk there, we were fortunate to put some signage just on the other side of the Dunkin' Donuts maybe 6 months ago because Edison School is right across the street. And even with the signage, we get complaints from parents with kids trying to cross. So it's certainly a dangerous area to cross, 4 lanes. You know, I'm pleased that there was some progress made with the county, although it's not finalized with regard to lighting and a crosswalk there. But, you know, the danger for crossing that road, if you have to have people parking at the Bethany lot, seems a little bit much for me to ask people to do. Also a little concerned with regard to the traffic. I know, you know, I don't do it for a living, but I have spent quite a bit of time in Park Drive North, West, and South. And you regularly have people parking illegally today. And it's not just because they want to discard the law. It's out of necessity. You have smaller homes, some of which don't have driveways, or you have larger families than the neighborhood was originally intended. And so you have more cars. So people are parking on the sidewalks now. My concern is for public safety. So if we're going to exacerbate the parking issues there, will our ambulances and fire trucks be able to access the full loop properly? I know that there are some challenges when you go around the corner at the top. And then, you know, to get off of north onto west, and then again from west to south. So there are some challenges already. And as Mr. Hazel said, any impact to that would have a big impact because it's already a problem. I don't think the Mississippi Avenue lot is feasible. I don't think people will choose to park there. It is a decent walk. And certainly at night, it's I would expect that people would be more hesitant either at night or in inclement weather. And then the character of the building with regard to the other properties in the area just seems a little bit out of place. Not that it's not you've made it attractive. I just pulled up the imagery, but you know, these are smaller single or multifamily homes on that loop. You do have some buildings on Main Street. But this one seems a little bit out of character in comparison to them. And then the last thing for me that is a challenge, and I just I lost my train. Oh, yeah, the commercial space. So the commercial space, while we do certainly want more commercial space on Main Street, I don't think, 900 square feet is really a substantial addition of commercial space on our Main Street as it is. So I don't know that it's going to pull down economic activity from the Harrison corner down a couple blocks more with just the one storefront there. Perhaps it would, depends, I guess, what you would put in there, but it just doesn't seem to me like it's substantial enough to really impact commercial traffic on that space. Now, there's a upside to that, parking and vehicular traffic, I don't think would be significantly increased by the commercial space. But the downside is, there are a lot of variances that are being applied that, or there are, the fact that it is a mixed use allows certain standards, I'll use your word, that if it were solely residential, they would not have. 900 square feet just doesn't seem like enough. So, while it is characterized as a good use from Mr. Hazel, and that very well may be the case, it is a difficult lot to develop. I don't think it is a good use in the sense of the impact on the existing neighborhood, on the vehicular traffic, and on public safety with regard to particularly crossing Main Street, given there are not enough parking spots on site for the residents and any potential commercial traffic that could come. So those are my challenges. Those are my general sentiments, and I'm happy to yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Vice Chairman Garino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wine, thank you very much for all your efforts and events. We thank the developer for their interest in the township of West Orange. Development's always good, especially for our main streets. And, we always look to have good development that fits the neighborhood, that fits the people. And that is a contribution to the character and makeup of our neighborhoods, particularly our downtown. It's a beautiful building. It's a lot of effort. And we do thank you for the efforts that you and your engineers and architects and designers came up. Everything we asked for, you came. My concerns about traffic, Main Street is being addressed as we continue our road diet from where it is now up to Eagle Rock Avenue. That's where Main Street's going to be made narrower. But, we're okay with traffic. The one thing is, if I can ask a question, a personal question else, did you or the developers or anybody go out and meet your potential new neighbors and tell them what you want to do and ask them their opinion of how they felt about a project like this?
So what I can tell you, I did not personally do it. What I can tell you is my client actually did go and attempt and knock on a couple of doors. Not everything within the 200 feet on the 200-foot list, but the couple of adjacent properties, they knocked on the doors and they did it a few times and reported back to me at different times of the day and reported back to me that nobody answered the door. So I don't want to be disingenuous and say, yeah, we met with them. We didn't meet with them, but we tried. I mean, my client, he is a developer who develops in different municipalities throughout the state. And that's something that he tries to do, is say, hey, the impact, if there's any, which again, we don't believe is substantial, but if there's any, it's going to be to these two properties. Let me try.
And I appreciate your candor and your honest answer. I do, because it's important that you're a welcome neighbor. We need to get along with each other. We need to feel comfortable. When I look at the project, it's a beautiful building. Saying it's colorful and everything else. It's got commercial. But to me, it's very overwhelming for the area. It's very overwhelming for the neighborhood. And I just, when I look at it, I'm saying, yeah, it's nice. If it had more of a setback, if it was farther away from the Main Street, from the sidewalks and more, but it's not. It's just when I drive down there and I walk that area, particularly with our Main Street, and you walk and you try to picture it, how it's going to look, how it's going to affect the residents, how they're going to feel about it. And, one of our important things is to listen to developers, to look at plans, to analyze things. But also the most important thing is to think about our residents, think about our neighbors, and say to yourself, how would you feel if you're in their position, and look at this project? So that's what I'm saying, that to me, and again, the township thanks you and your developer owner for their interest in the township. We hope you don't walk away. Hope you'll have other interests. but the building to me just doesn't fit the neighborhood, and that's how I feel. So thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman.
Alper.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Wine, and thank you for the members of the public who we've heard from over these weeks. There's a good number of things I like about the project, including the mixed use element, even though, I agree 900 square feet is not a lot, but I do think it's important that we have more mixed use downtown. And I'm really glad that we've finally been shown a project with a roof garden, which I really appreciate. I also take to heart the idea that this could be a busy store or something instead of an apartment with first floor retail. But I've had a number of concerns, 3 really, through the testimony. The first is parking. And, as much as I respect Mr. Meltz, having walked and driven the Park Drive Loop, I don't agree with all of his conclusions. And I would anticipate that anyone visiting the retail space, Amazon and UPS deliveries, residents unloading their groceries, Ubers, guests of residents, all of them, I think, would either be trying to find a spot on the loop before they go somewhere else, generating another trip around the block, or sitting with flashers on Park Drive North alongside 416 Main, and then coming around the loop to leave. So I think it would end up being more than 5 trips an hour as a result. I think resident parking places that would only be for Park Drive residents, if we could get that ironclad and set up properly, in combination with the off-site, off-street parking, which I think is a good idea in general, I think that can help, but I don't think it's going to resolve the other issues. So for parking, I have trouble seeing a way to a waiver there. Additionally, the setbacks, the particular one that concerns me is the one on Park Drive North, 5 feet rather than the required 25 feet. Along with the safety issues that have come up, I think credibly, it's also the case that the neighboring houses here are set back, have front yards with landscaping, gardens. It seems to be out of character with the rest of the neighborhood to me. And, it should be more similarly set back with an attractive public area. The 5-foot strip of grass and shrubs, doesn't do it enough for me, while a smaller structure would allow for that additional setback. And I think most importantly for me, the lot and the building coverage numbers, right? For lot coverage, 82% versus 60% permitted versus 30% for the former building. That's twice the old coverage. It's 37% more than allowed by the ordinance. And the building coverage, looking at 73% as designed versus 40% permitted versus 15% for the old building. So that's almost 5 times the amount of the old building coverage and 85% more than allowed. So it makes me wonder if the project does provide adequate light, air, and open space when it's occupying that much more space than what used to be there. To me, it doesn't. I think it's impinging too much on that concept, and reducing the amount of sunlight that will fall on the adjacent properties is another concern I have. I think the size of the building and the specific waivers for parking, for that setback, for the lot coverage and the building coverage remain problems here. So that's where I am.
Mr. Wilks.
Yes, a lot of the concerns have been already expressed by my colleagues before me, and me even touring the property and the area myself. It's the same. I don't want to be the dead horse with it, but the setback is an issue, the parking is an issue, and your neighbors are not necessarily seem to be very welcoming right now at this point about some of the things that are being done there to the area. So I'm concerned about that because they're our neighbors as well. So, and they're from the town and they pay taxes and they have very, very valid concerns about being on that street and the traffic that's going to come in that street. So that's kind of where I stand with that. A lot of things that were already repeated by my colleagues. So I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Wilks. Mr. Cardoza.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wine, for taking this board's feedback over the course of these nearly 6 months of hearings. Thank you, Mr. Hazel, for your evaluation and presenting with clarity. And thank you to the public for your comments and information. It was really impressive and I think informative testimony from the residents of the Park Drive Loop last week. They spoke to a few things that I'm going to list here, but studies not completed owing to the size of the building, a shadow study, light study, traffic study. I believe that in keeping with the standard practice, that the fact that these weren't completed was in keeping with the standard practice for development of this size, and perhaps Mr. Hazel can speak to this when I finish. The Park Drive Loop is a narrow road. There's limited parking. Those residents have a tough go of things, and I would never make light of that. Things they mentioned about difficulties, potential difficulties during construction, I think would remain the same regardless of whatever construction project, could potentially move forward. Architecture, there's a lot of mention about the architecture not keeping in character with the historic nature of the area. I think the proposed size itself is overwhelming and it does have a different look, but the aesthetics are subjective. So just from an aesthetic perspective, I don't have an issue with the aesthetics of the building outside its size. Whether or not there's a true solution for parking and whether or not the parking across the street or the parking at the additional lot would work as remedies, that would have to be in concert with, enhanced enforcement. There is no way for the board to guarantee or for the applicant to guarantee that everything would work exactly as intended. And then mention of a 900 square foot commercial space. I think Council President Rutherford spoke to both the benefits and the drawback of the size of the commercial space, potential drawbacks there. And that's everything I have. And Mr. Hazel, if you could potentially just answer my questions regarding those studies.
In terms of the shadow study and things of that sort.
Yeah, parking study.
I generally, I know that the size of this project, though it may seem relatively larger, in many instances, it does not reach the level of that. This is just a 2-story building. This is not 8 or 9 building, not to say that it doesn't cast a shadow itself, but this would not be something that would be generally considered to be a significant enough size and impact to trigger money in those studies. The study on the parking, however, I think you mentioned that as well. That's something that, it could have been valuable, because I know one of the things with the parking is that you look at the surrounding area at different times of the day and different times of the week, and see what type of availability there is for parking. I know I would be interested in seeing what that looked like, because especially with the Park Drive the way it is. But that's a little different than straight up traffic study where you'd be looking at the number of trips and so coming in.
Okay. And what about light in this case? I mean, you spoke about shadow, light bleeding over. I mean, the applicant has spoken about there would be downward facing lights.
Yeah, I think the technology is there now that you can pretty much get your lights fairly close to the property line without it spilling over. They've really gotten pretty good at that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just think, making those points clear for the public is helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Cardoza. Ms. Capper.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wine, and thanks to the members of the public who've come out to these meetings and have spoken so passionately about their neighborhood. I probably echo a lot of things that have already been shared. I do like the idea of the multi-use on Main Street, and I think we all have different opinions, or, we all want to envision something really great for Main Street. So I, appreciate that this project has kind of brought some of that out in comments, in deliberations as well. And I like the crosswalk idea. Certainly anything that we can do to promote pedestrian safety on Main Street. We have, as Mr. Greeno shared, we have talked about a road diet, any headway we can make with the county to promote pedestrian safety there is appreciated. I share the concerns that others have about parking. I would love to envision a world where people have fewer cars, but I think unfortunately we're not quite there yet. So I really appreciate all the effort that you've put into coming up with different solutions. I think, it sounds like it would be a condition of the plan, if the crosswalk and also potentially the permits for people who would be Park Drive North residents, would want to see that happen for sure. One question I do have, I realized I wasn't clear on this, and hopefully it's okay that I'm asking now. Affordable housing, did you say that you're paying into a fund? Like, is there an affordable housing component for this?
Yeah, so what I had said initially, and then I double checked the ordinance after last meeting, I had said I would comply with the ordinance requirements, which I had understood them at the time. It's a little bit, your ordinance is great. It's a little bit up to interpretation, that we would comply either through a payment or on site. After reviewing it, it does I looked at it with a different light and it would appear more that it's actually to put them on site. So we would put them on site. It would be 2 units, which is 20%. They would be on site and yeah, that would be part of the application. And I alluded to that in my previous closing, but that's, you know, obviously something that wouldn't come with a straight commercial development. It is something that comes with this.
Okay.
And they would, and
Thank
just for
you.
the record, and I'm happy to address more comments after, but just for the board's knowledge, the public's knowledge, the requirement of those affordable units is that, and Mr. Hayes can speak to this too, they are built to the exact same specifications as the market rate units. You know, they would also have that washer dryer setup. They would also have, like, you would not know, the size is the same. You would not know what, you know, which is an affordable unit, which is a market rate unit, if you were looking at a floor plan or if you were actually knocking the doors. And yes, there would be 2 incorporated in this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Okay,
it.
my turn. Mr. Wine, I commend you for the time you've spent with us and your applicant for responding to each and every question we've had. You've put a green roof on, you've changed the facade of the building, you've reorganized the parking, you've done everything you possibly could to make this fit. So here's my thoughts. I've reviewed the master plan, and we always have to, the board's responsibility is to the master plan and to the people who live in the neighborhood. So we listen to the people who live in the neighborhood. Most of their comments are about parking and traffic. One of the things that hasn't been addressed, there's a 900 square foot commercial space, less the ADA. There's no accommodation for parking for anybody who works there. So they would have to walk across the street, or if there's one space in the building, there may be one person working there, 2 people working there. The neighborhood consistently is buildings that are smaller. There would be at most 30 people in this building, at least 12. We have to look at, does this fit into the neighborhood? Is it compliant with everything in the zone? Yes, it is a mixed use structure. However, as was brought out by the applicant's asking for a C1 variance for shape, property, physical features, exceptional situation, and a C2 variance. We have to look at this and say, does this fit? It was a single family home that was in an oversized lot. And now it's a lot that, as was brought out, is taking up most of the lot coverage. You've mitigated the stormwater runoff by putting a green roof. So that's in their favor. One of the big things that I look at, the negative criteria, is it going to enhance the zone plan? Is it going to make it better for the welfare of the people in the community? You have a bus stop and you have a school bus stop, and there is a commercial space that on Main Street, somebody may park there to just run in. Hopefully everybody will go to the side of the building. The township has agreed to have a permit parking along the street for people there. That will take care of a problem that existed, whether this project goes forward or not. That's going to be uniquely taking care of the people in that U that are on a regular basis parking on the sidewalk. And I've been there at least 12 times, and I've had the opportunity to walk the site twice and listened to some of the neighbors' issues there. I've looked at the rear yard setback to the building next to it, and it is kind of tight, and the side yard setback. As we look at each setback, again, are we doing better in the neighborhood? Are we keeping what's going on in the neighborhood, or is this more problematic? Are we horseshoeing something in? And again, I think you guys have done an amazing job. However, I don't see that this project fits the neighborhood. And if you heard a number of members of the board said, if it was a little smaller, if there was less people living in there, if there was less cars, if they wouldn't have to go across the street. There's a walking across the street, and there's been in the last month, somebody was hit by a car walking across the street. We're increasing that possibility. Everything would have to work out perfectly. And one day when I was there, I was almost sideswiped by somebody driving rapidly up the street who was texting. Problems on a lot of issues there, but we have to, as a board, look at this and say, does this make sense? Is it going to promote the zone plan, the intent of the master plan? And to that end, I make a motion, we deny PB 24-06410 Main Street LLC, Block 113, 262, 264, 308, as presented to us today. And what that means is if you vote yes or aye, that means that motion carries. It will be denied. If you vote no, the motion is defeated, and then we will have another motion if somebody presents to approve this. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Okay, good. So a vote yes agrees with the motion to deny. A vote no means I disagree with the motion, and we can have another motion afterwards. Okay? So Yamilet on the motion.
a second?
I'm sorry?
Second.
You
Yeah,
second,
second.
Vice Chairman seconds the motion. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Keeping me honest. Okay, Yamilet on the motion.
This is the motion to deny.
Correct.
Mr. Alpert,
Yes.
Mr. Klein,
No.
Mr. Wilks,
Yes.
Mr. Cardoza,
No.
Ms. Gaffer,
No.
Council President Rutherford,
Yes.
Mayor McCartney,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino,
Yes.
Chairman Bago.
Yes. Tell me if I'm right. It's 6 yeses and 3 nos. Is that correct? The motion is approved. The application is denied.
Thank you, everybody, for that.
Thank you. Guys, I just have to say this. The goal of the applicant, who's done an outstanding
You've
job,
done a great job.
outstanding,
I know, sorry.
has
but
done
it's-
everything that they possibly could to make this work.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that. This is not something we take lightly. There's been a lot of time, money invested, and your time invested. This is that we all have to live together, and based on our master plan and what we see as good neighbor policies, we couldn't say yes to this. That doesn't mean they're not going to come back and modify the application. Okay? Again, we want to thank you very much and thank the applicant. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
The next application before us is PB 2415, Essex County Country Club, Block 156, Lot 1, Zone R2, 350 Mount Pleasant Avenue. The applicant, Essex County Country Club, proposed a number of improvements to an existing pool house building on the subject site. The improvements include the expansion of the covered walkway, construction of an open-air covered bar with a grill area, expansion of the existing patio, and construction of a pergola with seating underneath for the applicant, Lisa John Basta.
Okay, good evening, Lisa John Boss with the law firm Kays, Shahinian and Jan Tomasi on behalf of the applicant Essex County Country Club. To just begin, Essex County Country Club, by way of very brief background, is the owner of property located at 350 Mount Pleasant Avenue, which measures approximately 176 acres in size. The applicant is the oldest country club in the state of New Jersey and has been located at this site in West Orange since 1917. The property has been built out with a golf course and clubhouse and a host of other accessory structures, including a pool house and pool patio area since at least 1978, which is the survey that we submitted with the application. Tonight it's here to do some renovations to the existing pool house and some improvements within the pool house area. We have a few people to discuss that application this evening. I know there have been jurisdictional issues raised by Ms. Michaela Bennett. I follow the board's lead as to how they would like to proceed with the application.
Ms. McGovern.
So we did receive, and I received an email from Ms. Bennett, and I'm going to make that a part of the agenda. I did ask for Ms. Bennett to send it to me as an attachment, because what happens when you print out emails is that you keep getting duplicates, because, you know, you keep, as you see, responses going back. I think I have both of them, or 3 of them. Ms. Bennett, I'm going to ask that you come up just so I can keep the record consistent, and then we are going to talk about this for a minute. I have an email, the first email that I received from you was dated November 24th at 2:23 a.m. And then I responded on November 25th at 12:37, and then I got another email from you on November 25th at 10:50 PM. And then I got a third email on December 10th. And because of the circular nature of emails, I just want to confirm that those were the three submissions that you wanted to be put on the agenda.
Would you mind just reviewing the content of the email?
Sure.
Because the dates are not going to help me right now. So
Okay,
I
sure.
believe that I sent you.
The first one on November 24th starts with, I write regarding the above referenced PB application scheduled for December 4, 2024. The applicant's notice, which a neighbor shared with me, is deficient, and you attach
That's
the
right.
notice.
So that's one.
That's the first one.
Yes.
Okay. And my response to you was, I have reviewed your email and the notice sent by the applicant for Essex County Country Club. The notice not only, well, we'll go into that issue. I did respond to you about notice.
Yes, ma'am.
Then you responded again, thank you, Ms. McGovern. If the applicant needs to return to the ABC board for an expansion of the existing liquor license, that's how that one continued. Is that the next one? Because that's the next one in my email chain.
So my recollection of the emails that were submitted, Ms. John Boston might be able to help as well. She responded to one of my emails.
And I think it was this one, but this is the
I don't
problem
know
with
if
the
it's the-
emails.
I don't know if it's the first. I don't know if it's subsequent.
And then I had other emails from you on other things.
So what I can tell you is that I raised the jurisdictional issues of notice and of improper venue. So
Okay.
those are two issues.
And then the last one is Tuesday, December 10th. I have not heard back. What is the status of tomorrow's meeting? So this
So I
is all what
provided-
you wanted on the agenda.
No, I provided you with a copy of the Oprah request.
And that's already been put on the agenda.
That I submitted.
Right.
Regarding the Essex County Country Club's liquor license. Yeah. So I
Okay.
wanted to make sure that the board had a copy of that.
Yes, we
I
had
wanted
it.
to make sure that the board had a copy of a letter that Miss John Basta responded to, because her response.
Yeah, but that's the question I have is what letter are you talking? When you talk about a letter, is it the emails or is it something else?
It's her letter.
Oh, her letter. Okay.
Her letter is in response to my email, but my email was not included. for
And
the
that's
board
what
to
I want
review.
to attach because there's been several emails back and forth. And that's why I had asked you, when you want something submitted for the agenda, to submit it as an attachment so I don't get pages of emails, like duplicative emails.
Understood. And
Okay.
As you are well aware, I'm under no obligation to submit anything as. a
Oh, no,
member of the
and,
public.
but if you want
So-
something to be not
so-
confusing on the agenda, I'm asking that be the way
In the
that it be
spirit of
presented.
cooperation and to be able to frame the argument so that the applicant could correct the error, so that the board would have an appreciation of what I'm going to raise. What I did was send you a copy of it, but at the point in which the applicant submits a letter as a reply brief to my argument should have been made available to the board. That's all I was trying to say.
Okay, well, you're here and we're going to get through that. I'm going to give this to Jamalette to put on the agenda now that I have
But
figured
you
out which one.
understand,
And if we're not.
The
what
point
time
that
is
I'm
it?
trying to make is that we shouldn't cultivate the record such that the applicant's arguments are available to the board, but an objector's arguments are not.
Understand that when an attorney who's representing the applicant submits to the board secretary an attachment, it will get on the agenda. Same thing would be for as you as an attorney, although you're self-represented, you're still an attorney. If you send us an attachment to be, regardless of content or whatever, if it's an attachment that it's clearly supposed to be something on the agenda, you send me emails. I get emails from people all the time. They don't belong on the agenda.
I see Mr. Klein nodding his head. What I will say is I'm under no obligation to do so.
And
I'm
I'm,
under no obligation.
I
to
understand that,
follow
but if you want the
form.
board to review it, then follow the procedure.
I'm
That is-
suggesting to you that the procedure is I do not need to do that.
Okay.
But at the point in which the applicant writes a letter brief saying it's in reply to arguments that I've made, I believe you are doing a disservice to this board by not making available to them the arguments that I made. Otherwise, they're reading the applicant's reply and they do not know what I've articulated as an argument. And it is very easy with technology to be able to save an email and upload it up into the record. So if you needed me to do something,
I said that to you.
I should have been told that before today.
Well, going forward, this is going to be the practice. I have the emails here and we will put them on the agenda. But going forward, if you want something to be posted, it's got to be clear. So it's got to be specified.
I'll
This
make
is
sure I
it.
specify in the future.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Ms. McGovern.
Okay, so this will be corrected. You're here, you can make whatever arguments that you need so that the board will know all of them. And I don't know how the chairman wants to proceed, but I just wanted to make that available to the record. So maybe Mr. Jamillet.
Jurisdictional?
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then Ms. John Bosser will have a chance to respond.
Absolutely. Okay, so I will just say to you foundationally, it was very nice to see that last application and how you all contemplated the public and you know, the public's concerns. And you know, it was really a pleasure to watch. I will also tell you foundationally, I don't know that I even want to be here because I don't know that I really am objecting to the idea of a bar being built poolside. It's not in my backyard, so I'm not sure that I'm objecting to that. But the reason I'm standing before you is because a bar is not a permissible use in an R2 zone. And building a bar, even though we don't want to say that we're building a bar, because we know it's an impermissible use in an R2 zone, requires the zoning board to consider the application, not the planning board. So foundationally, I want to start with improper venue. You can look at your ordinance. Your ordinance, you can only have one use in an R2 zone. Your ordinance permits as a use a golf course. It permits as a use a golf club house. It accepts a golf club. So what I would say to you foundationally is a bar being built on a golf course is not a use you should be considering tonight. This application belongs before the zoning board. That's my first statement. Now, I would say to you, just because I did have the opportunity to briefly read Ms. John Basta's response, she says that if you look at, I'm sorry, I'll look it up because I don't remember the title of that third column in the ordinance. She says that if you look at the ordinance and the table of district regulations, part A, and you look under permitted conditional uses, you will see that a permitted conditional use in an R2 zone is a private club other than a golf club. I understand that to mean a private club is permissible in an R2 zone, permitted conditional use, as long as it's not a golf club. Now, I would say that the township intentionally didn't extend golf club in the ordinance because it's in an R2 zone. I would share with you that swimming pools are permitted accessory uses, as are private recreational facilities. But if you look that up in the ordinance and you read the definition of both, it talks about swimming pools with residences. It does not talk about them on a golf course. It does not talk about recreational facilities like tennis courts on a golf course. It says a tennis court is permissible at a residence. So what you have in front of you is an application that I'm going to suggest is before the incorrect venue. They are seeking to add a bar. I believe that's how I understand the notice. I'll shift to the notice unless you have any questions regarding the argument about two uses, and those two use, you can only hear an application for one use.
Can I address if it's okay?
I'd like to just state the jurisdictional.
Sure.
Okay, so notice. I could read from the GAN law book on this issue that coincidentally, Ms. John Basta is an editor of. But what you're required to do to determine if this is before the proper, I'm sorry. Bear with me. Oh, just one other thing, I'm sorry. One other thing on the jurisdictional issue of use. So there are, I think, 6 questions that you're supposed to ask. Does it involve a use not permitted in the zone? I would suggest that a bar is a use not permitted in the zone. Now, I'm not suggesting that they can't eventually get permission to do this. I'm saying that they're in front of the wrong venue in order to make their argument for why they should be permitted to do so. It goes on to ask other questions, but that section of the book basically says, if you answer yes to any one of these, then you're before the improper venue. Okay, so the next issue that I wanted to address is notice. It's not the time date component of the notice that I'm raising as a concern. And I raise this concern because if the board is not gatekeeping notice, how do you know that the public understands what's before you and is in front of you when it's of concern to them? I mean, that's the foundational issue. What's required in notice is that the nature of the matter to be considered is documented in such a way that an ordinary layperson would understand. And if you look at the notice from the applicant, and you'll well remember, we've been through this before, notice particularly about the sale of alcohol. If you look at the notice, what you'll see, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
I have
but
it. You want me to read it?
If you can read the relevant section, I would appreciate
The
that.
property is currently developed with an existing golf course, clubhouse, pool house building, swimming pool, tennis courts, and a number of other accessory structures. In connection with the subject application, the Essex County Country Club, the applicant, has applied to the planning board for site plan approval in order to renovate the existing pool house building and to construct an open-air pavilion with a bar seating area to be attached to the pool house, as well as a covered pergola with tables and chairs. In connection with the pool house renovation and construction of the open-air pavilion, applicant requests variance relief to deviate from the Township Code, Section 25-8.1F, to exceed the maximum possible permissible height for accessory structures located in a residential zone of 15 feet, whereas the existing pool house building is 15.5 feet, and the renovated pool house building is proposed at 17.2 feet, with the open-air pavilion proposed at 17.83 feet. The applicant also proposes associated improvements, but not limited to expanded paver and walkway areas, grill area, fencing, and landscaping. For the avoidance of doubt, the applicant intends to continue to sell alcoholic beverages from the premises. The applicant further requests that the board grant any additional approvals, permits, variants, interpretations, waivers, or exceptions reflected in the plans and materials filed, as same may be amended or revised from time to time without further notice or determined to be necessary during the review and processing of the application.
Would
Did
you
I
mind-
read the entire section that you wanted?
Probably more than we needed, but would
Sorry.
you mind rereading? No, you don't have to apologize. Thank you for your thoroughness. Would you mind rereading the sentence that includes alcohol in it?
There's two. To construct an open-air pavilion with a bar seating area, and then applicant intends to continue to sell alcoholic beverages from the premises.
Could you read the first part of that last sentence? To avoid any,
For the avoidance of doubt, the applicant intends to continue to sell alcohol beverages from the premises.
I provided this board a copy of the applicant's liquor license. The liquor license has within it a sketch of where they're permitted to sell alcohol, the only place they're permitted to sell alcohol. You'll remember at a prior application, Ms. John Basta mistakenly advised you that they can sell alcohol anywhere from the 177 acres. That's not factually accurate. They're allowed to sell alcohol from the location that is sketched within the liquor license. And that's it. And so that sketch is of the clubhouse. If you look at, Ms. McGovern, I don't know how they've received, is it in the packet or?
It just gets posted to the agenda. The board members review the agenda. I will say this, I could see it online, but I couldn't print it out, so I don't have a copy with me. For some reason, my computer wasn't, and my office was not allowing me to print it out, but I did get to review it, and I think the board members know because they get revised agendas as the day goes on.
Fair enough.
It alerts them. If they get to it, they get to it. I can't promise you that everyone
I'm an attorney.
looked at it
just
as
like
well
you.
as you did.
I have obligations to be truthful to judicial authorities just like you. And I just want to share with you that I have shared with you what was provided to me by the township, which is a copy of the liquor license for the Essex County Country Club that has a sketch within it. They are required to sketch where they are requesting permission to be able to sell alcohol from. If you listen to what they said in the notice, the avoidance of any, we intend to continue to, thank you, we intend to continue to sell alcohol. Where?
Can I ask
If
a
it's
question?
being mentioned, I'm sorry, Mr. Bagoff.
Right. Yeah.
I won't accuse you of
Finish,
interrupting me. So let's avoid doubt. Is this application an application to build a poolside bar under a pavilion that they intend to sell alcohol from? If that's the case, say that. Because if you say that, then every layperson, every person who applies common sense understands that this is an application before a body that seeks to build a pavilion and a bar and sell alcohol. And I got news for you. If it's over by their pool, I don't care. It's not in my backyard, so I don't care. But what I do care about is that this board require applicants, particularly well-resourced applicants, to play by the rules. The rules require an applicant. I can read from the book. The rules require an applicant to be very specific, especially when the sale of alcohol is something that the public should know about. And all I'm asking is that this applicant, if you decide to move forward, if you decide you are the proper venue, that this applicant is required to renotice the public, because that language in the application, in the notice, is not specific enough that it leaves without any doubt for the public what they intend to do in that structure, in that pavilion. If there's no questions, I'm done.
There's a couple of moving parts here to what you said. The first moving part is the planning board is that our obligation is to listen to the structure and what is being built. Okay, so that's one part of this, and that is under the purview of the board.
Sir, your obligation is to determine if you're the proper venue before you listen to anything.
Let me finish, please. So we are not approving or disapproving the sale of alcohol. That is up to the ABC board.
I understand that. We've been down that road before. I know you're not approving the sale of alcohol, but you must consider this. Touche, today I'm interrupting you, right? So look, you must consider the sale of alcohol when you consider the intended use. Otherwise, why would it be required by the courts that you specifically as an applicant state the intent to sell alcohol?
So
I'm not saying to you that you're approving the sale of alcohol. I'm saying to you, and the reason why you've got me excited is because we've gone round and round on this previously. The sale of alcohol is relevant so that you can determine information on the use if you decide to hear this, if you decide you're the proper venue. And it's important that the sale of alcohol is specifically stated. I don't understand all the demonstrative. All I'm trying to say to you is the sale of alcohol should just be stated. Are they going to serve and sell alcohol under the pavilion at the bar? If they are, say it.
So the planning board, as I've said before, does not have purview over the sale of alcohol. If at time in the future, the town council is the ABC board and their members are here, will now inquire. does this go beyond their original approval? Our job is to look at a structure that is called a bar seating. They could serve hot dogs at the bar seating. I'm not asking what they do or they don't. Is this within the purview of the planning board to evaluate and have a site plan for a building? That's what this is. The sale of alcohol. And I believe that the intent of the ordinance is a bar as a freestanding structure that is not associated with a golf course. Having said that, we're talking about a building, and we've had issues before with other applicants where there are multiple uses, and the use has to do with a building. Our job is not to talk about the use that is governed by another governing body, such as the ABC board. Our job is to say, does this pavilion fit within the guidelines? And if variances are required, are the variances acceptable based on a C1, C2 variance, and does it fit within the master plan? So I want to make it as simple as possible for us, so we don't get embroiled in something that's going to be bounced back and forth between the boards. So having said that, I'll ask Ms. John-Basta to.
Just bear with me 1 second. I just want to make sure that I state for the record that I object to the way in which you've just categorized this. I've raised this in a prior application. It's going to repeat itself until we end up somewhere else, I suspect. I think it is Ms. McGovern's responsibility to make sure you have a good understanding of the law, and case law will advise you that if you didn't have to consider the sale of alcohol, it wouldn't have been required in the notice. The sale of alcohol is absolutely relevant to your decisions around an applicant's application. So I think foundationally, there's a venue issue. I see Ms. John-Basta's very interested in getting in. So I mean, I'll stop. I won't repeat myself.
So you're basically telling the board that if this is built, alcohol must be served there.
No,
Okay,
nope,
then if it's
that's not what I'm saying.
Then to the board, this is a building structure that may ask for, if they need it, I don't know that they do, this is way out of my scope of expertise, they will go back to, if they feel, their attorney feels that they need to go back to the ABC board to have them look at this and say it's an extension or not. But we're looking at a building and a pergola and variances. I'm going to ask one more of our experts, Mr. Hazel, does this fit within the requirements to be heard by the planning board?
In my opinion, I did review the correspondence from Ms. Bennett. And in my opinion, I believe that it is rightfully in front of this board. I do believe that everything that was said before in terms of the this being a golf course, but in my understanding of the ordinance is there are multiple components to that use. These are not presented or operated or any way shown as separate uses. They're all part of the whole, whether you call it golf club or whatever, it's part of the whole entity that is before this board as a golf club.
Chairman, it's the or whatever that concerns me. It's very specific. The ordinance is very specific.
Okay.
It says what it says. It's not an or whatever. There are specific uses that are permitted. There are conditional, there are accessory uses. So it's not or whatever. It's not exhaustive. It's not infinite. And so if you read what our ordinance says, this is not before the proper venue.
Thank you. Yes. So I did submit a letter to the board dated December 2nd, 2024, which addressed these two issues in detail, but I feel the need to do it on the record as well. So to address, I think in the order that Ms. Bennett stated them, one relates to venue, and it's being alleged by Ms. Bennett that there's a quote unquote bar that's being proposed here. A bar under West Orange definition, I have the code in front of me, states, shall mean a place of business duly licensed by the Alcohol Beverage Control Board for the sale and on-premises consumption of alcohol beverages by the drink as the principal or primary use, okay? Here, we are submitting that the bar the bar that's being proposed, that's covered by the pavilion, is not the primary or principal use. And it's also, I think in here, it says that's open to the public, okay? This is a private golf club and there's a bar there that's being proposed. Secondarily, related to use and multiple uses, perhaps on the property that Ms. Bennett is talking about, there's a reference that I made to your permitted use schedule. Your permitted use schedule is Part A, permitted table of district regulations. There's a clear column, we're in the R2 zone. There's a clear column that says permitted principal uses, golf course and golf clubhouse. There's another column that says permitted accessory uses, which states customary accessory building or structures related to the principal use. We submit to you that what has been on the site for however many years it is, more than 30 years, is an accessory use to the principal use of the golf course and the golf clubhouse. There's a separate column here that says principal conditional uses. That has private club, comma, other than a golf club. So my reading of that means that a private club, if you're going to say that there's a golf club and a private club here, like that's not what the intent of your ordinance is. Your ordinance is to say a golf club is specifically permitted in our permitted use column, and you're also allowed to have customary accessory structures related thereto as a principal use within the zoning district where we're located. So that goes to, and it is one country club, golf club that is operating here. There's not multiple uses that are operating on the lot. More so to the jurisdiction as well, I did submit a survey from at least 1978. As you heard, this is the oldest country club in the state of New Jersey. Thomas Edison was a member of it. It's been here since 1917. This planning board has assumed jurisdiction over this property on at least 10 separate occasions, and I submit those resolutions. If the board didn't believe that it didn't have jurisdiction, if there was more than 2 uses operating here, or if there was something that was not allowed, it would have went to the zoning board. The planning board retained jurisdiction over. I also submitted with my letter 2 other country club applications, Crestmont Country Club and the Montclair Golf Club, both in the R2 zoning district where this property is located. The planning board assumed jurisdiction, and both of those applications and resolutions I submitted to this board related to renovations or constructions of pool houses that were accessory to the golf club. So I would say that it has been established with precedent and a clear reading of your ordinance that the town has historically considered pool houses, which is the subject of this application, as customary incidental to and accessory to the golf club. That's my position on uses and proper venue. To address the notice issue, as Ms. McGovern read, the notice and notice, like actually, I want to go back to the golf course thing too, and the liquor licensing. Actually, this goes to the notice, I'm sorry. So the purpose of notice, and I can pass it out for the board if you would like to, but the statute itself under the municipal land use law, it says you have to identify the nature of the application to be considered. It doesn't say you have to say if you're going to get a liquor license or if you're going to be amending your liquor license. It says the nature of the application to be considered so that the average person that's reading the notice would understand what's happening. The notice that I prepared and that was submitted in connection with the application clearly says that a pavilion is being constructed for a bar seating area. And because I have seen Ms. Bennett on other occasions and raise these liquor license issues, I include it for the avoidance of the doubt, which I don't believe I had to include. I believe it went above and beyond, which is necessary under the law, is that we included for the avoidance of doubt, they're going to continue to sell alcohol from the premises. The premises, the property, right? I know Ms. Bennett did submit some response from, I guess, the town clerk to an Oprah request. I don't know when the request was made, what was asked in the request. But I do have copies of, and there, it looked like there was a page missing as well because it talked about structures and it said page 1 of 2, or it looked like there's something missing out of it, okay? So my understanding, and I think this is going beyond what the board needs to know, but my understanding of liquor licensing, and I'm going to pass around the most recent amendments to the Essex County Country Club ones, and it clearly establishes that the golf course itself, which is over 176 acres, is licensed to sell alcohol. There are also, and you also amended, which I understand, I'm not a liquor license expert myself, but what I understand is you amended if you're building a structure. So there's a structure there, a clubhouse, and there's a structure that's a pool house, and both of them are liquor licensed today. If the board is inclined to approve this pavilion, I believe it would require some sort of amendment. I don't know, but it's still, alcohol is still being sold from the overall premises, 176 acres. If we have to do an administrative amendment to reference this structure, that will be done. We would gladly do it as a condition of approval as well. But for all intents and purposes, I believe that the notice met the statutory requirements, that the average person understood the nature of the application that was going to be presented to the board this evening. So for those reasons, I would submit that the board does have jurisdiction and should consider this application tonight. And I would like to mark into evidence exhibits A1 and A2, if it's okay with you. A1 is an amendment to the Essex County Country Club liquor license, which was stamped received by the clerk on April 1st, 2024. And then another filing that was made on October 10th, 2024, and I'll mark that as A2. They were both filed with the clerk, and they clearly established those two structures, as well as the golf course that is licensed. Although I think this is outside of your purview, but because Ms. Bennett submitted her response, I would like this to be clearly established.
May I see that first?
You may.
Thank you.
I have an extra copy for you.
Ms. Bennett, I read the public notice. Being a member of the public, I wanted to make sure that I understood what was going on here. And I understood that liquor will be sold here. I also understood that the planning board does not have purview over that. So again, our job is to look at a structure and what the structure is going to be used for. They can say they're going to use it for a bar. They can say they're using it for whatever they want to use it for. If their liquor license is not confluent with that structure, they will seek expansion from the town ABC board. If, on the other hand, the town ABC board feels that the golf club, whatever that is, at the end of the day, the structure is allowed to have liquor in it. If they have a dining room, they can have liquor there. If they have a pool, they can have liquor there. Then
Chairman, the
that's up to them.
your suggestion that you are a member of the public, you're not a common lay person. Your read of this, you've been the chairman of the planning board for how long?
But that doesn't preclude me from understanding what's been said.
It doesn't preclude you, but it says you're not the common average lay person.
Well-
And that's, I would just,
The law, I'm sorry, I've had this before. I don't believe the law puts me in a separate category. If I'm reading this as a person in town, I don't have superior knowledge about alcohol. I don't, except drinking it. And where it's sold, I do not have superior knowledge. But I did understand the plain English. There was nothing more than plain English there that led me to understand, and I will ask Ms. McGovern.
Okay, I just want to highlight.
Ms. McGovern, I just want to address something that was raised by Ms. John Basta. She said that what I submitted, there was a page missing. I submitted what I received from the Oprah custodian. Can you reference which page is missing?
I am not saying that you purposely took out a page.
I know you're not.
Or that it was,
No,
yeah.
I know you're
I
not,
can-
because what I did was I forwarded what I received
Sure.
from the Oprah custodian from the township. But if there was a page missing from that, I would like to know which one so I can just get directly to that page.
I don't have it in front of me right now, but
These aren't numbered, so I just want to get to the right page.
yeah. So if you go into, I guess it's page 1, 2, 3. Page 3, it says in section 3.2, building 1 of 2 to be licensed. And then
I see that.
there should be a duplicate page that then tells you what the 2 buildings are, and it's not there.
So
Yes.
Okay, so
the clerk, the Oprah custodian, the township clerk, provided me with the liquor license and what was approved, and it does not have a second page there. I noticed that myself. It said 1 of 2, I looked for the next page.
Yeah.
There was no page. So now that a page has appeared, I think it would be important to understand why the township does not have a copy of that.
I mean,
'Cause I
so
do believe Ms. Carnival provided me with everything that she had.
I don't know when this looks like this is an application from 2013. So I don't know
I believe
what the
that's,
custodian records has or what they forwarded, but I'm submitting what the latest amendments were, which are the most relevant here. And it's, received by the clerk. The application is dated April 9th, 2024. And there's an amendment that's dated October 10th, 2024.
so is it your representation that when this was submitted to the township in 2013, that second page was there?
I have no idea. I wasn't involved in 2013.
Ms. Bennett, Ms. John Basta, it's the board attorney's decision whether notice is acceptable or defective. Okay?
All right, so you did cite some case law and Ms. John Basta responded, and I just want to highlight a couple of things. There's two seminal cases, Pond Run Watershed, 397 NJ Super 335. It's an appellate division case. And Ms. Bennett, I know you're familiar with it because you cited it as well. Then there's another case, Pearl Mart of Lacey, which is the first case, and that's 295 NJ Super 234. That was a 1996 appellate division case. And those cases talk about what's required in a notice to allow people to know what to expect, why they would want to come. In the Pond Run case, it was a completely brand new building that was not clear in the notice, or that the issue was it clear enough that it was going to be a large restaurant with a bar inside the restaurant. It was brand new, hadn't been pre-existing. This is something that's been there, and the notice reflects that alcohol would be continued to be served.
The pavilion has not been
Please
there,
let me finish, okay?
and that's where they proposed to build the bar.
Pearl Mart of Lacey, it's still on the same premises, and actually everything is attached to each other over there. That pool house is being expanded if you look at the plans, but that's beside the point.
The pavilion
The-
is
the-
not
Excuse
attached.
me, the Pearl Mart versus Lacey case, that's where they completely left out the fact that the project was a Kmart. And that had they said this is going to be a Kmart, the people in the 200-foot radius would have had a good idea of what was going in. This is not this case. In my opinion, this notice is satisfactory because it lets people know at this pool house area, there's going to be an expansion and there's going to be continued sale of alcohol. Now, with respect to that, whether it's permitted or not, again, not the board's decision. And I do want to let the board know, and I will inform you as well. I did my own little legal research. What happens when a planning board approves a site plan and there is a liquor license involved? What happens? There's actually a case that was heard in the administrative office. It was Hens Management versus Patterson ABC Board. This Hens Management, and that was decided
Is it
in
controlling?
May. Yeah, it's an Office of Administrative. It's not a Superior Court decision because that's where an ABC action would be heard.
I understand.
What happened in that case, the planning board approved a pocket license to go in on a site plan to a supermarket. And the supermarket was then had to go in front of the ABC board, much like the club will have to do to make sure that their license is appropriate. The Patterson ABC board turned that project down and said, no, under our ABC rules, there's another license within 1,000 feet, so you can't have it. They tried to argue that they relied upon the planning board's decision, and they were told no.
We all agree on that.
So
There's
the
no
point,
argument.
right, so
I understand that
so
in
the
order for
point
them to
is,
sell
any,
alcohol at the pavilion, they need the ABC
they're
board to
going to have to
expand their
get
liquor
consent.
license.
But my point is, this notice expresses to anybody who reads it enough information for them to know some type of enlargement of the sale is of this project where there may be or will be alcohol being sold is being advised. So on that part, I
appreciate your
believe the
read.
notice is sufficient.
I appreciate
With
your read.
respect to the second part of this, with is it an accessory use? Is it a separate use? consistently in this town, because you have an awful lot of country clubs and golf courses for one municipality, it's wonderful. However, the way this planning board has dealt with those, Rock Spring had pool, tennis courts, other things, I think, Montclair, Crestmont, this board has handled each one of those applications regarding work being done in site plan on all of them consistently throughout the years. So to keep consistent, I think that it's self-explanatory and this board has jurisdiction to hear this site plan application.
What is self-explanatory, Ms. McGovern, is that this board has been hearing presuming that a pool was before this board, presuming that the requests to expand use were before this board, which I'm not willing to presume.
Okay.
You don't know who's.
But customary accessory uses with golf clubs, especially in this town, all include these things. All of these golf clubs have pools and tennis courts and snack bars
And
and
perhaps they
pool
received,
bars.
perhaps they received the approval to do so.
They
But
were
you
here in
have to
front of the
receive-
planning board.
But you have to receive the approval to expand use beyond one principal use in front of the zoning board. Do you disagree with that? Do you disagree that?
I disagree
if you
because
have-
I think it's part and parcel with the ordinance as
Ms. McGovern,
describing these
I'm
golf
asking you as a
clubs.
matter of law, do you believe that in the R2 zone, there may only be one principal use?
Yes, and I think this is here. It's
And
a
if there
golf
is
club.
one principal use
And
in the
these are
R2
accessory
zone,
uses.
and the ordinance says that it is excluding a golf club, then
That's that's not what it says.
That's-
It
I think that you
specifically,
should read it. It
specifically,
says
it
that a
specifically
private club
said-
is permissible,
it
except a golf club.
Do you want me to read
it
it again?
specifically allows customary accessory uses.
Read it.
I will read it if you give me the opportunity. R2 zoning district, the top of the column reads permitted principal uses, golf course and golf clubhouse. Another column, top of the column says permitted accessory uses, customary accessory building or structure. A separate, totally distinct column, permitted conditional uses, private club, comma, other than a golf club.
Other than.
But that's, we're not here
Right.
before.
In addition
permitted
to
for
a golf
conditional
club.
use.
Maybe I'm wrong, but to me, that means that a golf club is allowed and that if you want to open, I don't know if a nightclub's the same, an Elks is perfect. If you want to open an Elks, that would be a conditional use, but we're excluding golf courses from that.
Excuse me, we're not interpreting this ordinance. I'm saying we are continuing to be consistent. This is the way it has been done. Mr. Hazel, would you agree with me? That this board is not doing an interpretation of this ordinance. The board is hearing this application based upon the way that they have heard all of these golf club applications. There's no reason here to change this because that ordinance is clear on its face that it is applicable to this application.
So I'll end here. It is not this board's obligation to interpret any law, but it is their attorney's obligation to interpret the law. And as I understand you to say, that the long-standing history, although we do not know whether or not those golf clubs that have pools and pool houses, et cetera, we don't know if those were before the zoning board or the planning board. You're saying that because they have them and because they've been before you, you may therefore ignore the ordinance that specifically states what the proper venue is for this. Now, I understand by the look on your face, the way you're nodding, the way you're reacting, you disagree with me. But I think ultimately it comes down to if the courts do. And I was trying to avoid that by just saying renotice. Say you're going to be selling alcohol from a bar under a pavilion that you plan to build.
I'm confused though. On one hand, you want them to renotice, but on the other hand, you don't want them in front of this board at all.
They should be before the zoning board. Two principal uses cannot be before this board.
And there's the disagreement. The
Ms.
disagreement
Bennett.
is that this is an accessory use, that these are always, this has always been considered an accessory use and we're consistent.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bennett. Don't go anywhere. Unless somebody disagrees, the ruling of the board is that this application is being seated in the appropriate venue, and we will hear it going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Right.
I'm gonna hand you this, are you?
Copies.
I didn't give Gemma that one, so, do we have any witnesses to start tonight, or this is
I-
kind of late, did you wanna?
We're gonna, we're done.
Did you?
I have all my witnesses available if we're ready to start.
Who's gonna be on the board in January?
We're gonna find out.
Yeah.
The young lady to the right of you is going to do her magic. Okay,
You won't do that? Okay.
we're not done. We have a couple of things to do administratively. So we're going to carry PB 24-01 West Texas Highlands Incorporated. Block 179, lot 32, I'm sorry. Where'd it go? Things here.
January 8th.
With the, nope, where'd it go?
Regular?
I'm missing, oh, here it is. We are going to carry PB 24-15 Essex County Country Club, block 156, lot 1, zone R2 to the
January 8th, 2025, regular meeting, which will be on Zoom, no further.
no further notice will be required. At
Just
which-
for clarification for any members of the public that are listening that are present, how will those Zoom instructions be able to be found?
The usual way, they go to the website and it says right there in the agenda area, it'll say our meeting, the date, and right under it is the Zoom contact.
Okay, so the Zoom I just want to say it for the record for everybody.
Sure.
So this is being carried to January
8th,
8th
2025 at 7:30 PM via Zoom, and go to the West Orange Planning Board website, look at the agenda, click on that day's agenda, and a Zoom link will come up. pop
And
up.
I assume the members of the public can also reach out to the board secretary if they have any questions on how to attend that meeting as well.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question for our board. We're looking at a special meeting in January.
No.
True.
January 8th, we've got January 29th for West Sussex Highlands, and another matter arose where the question became special meeting on January 22nd.
You buy a dinner, you bring a dinner?
No, it's on Zoom.
Via Zoom,
Is Zoom?
Via Zoom.
okay?
And so do we have enough board members to?
Can anybody not make it?
Killing me.
January
I need a
22nd via
raise.
Zoom, 7:30.
Oh,
Yeah. Mr. Wolf? Outstanding.
All right.
Mr. Hazel?
What is are we allowed to know what the matter is?
I'll tell you.
Yeah, well,
I'll look at someone.
Okay.
thank
So
you.
it has to do with the address of 40 Eagle Ridge Way. There may, and I'm gonna be perfectly honest, it may be one of these things where we need yet another meeting, and I may be asking you all for another special meeting, but maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, we get it all done on January 22nd. On Zoom.
Okay, the next regular meeting of the planning board will be Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 at 7:30 PM via Zoom. The next special meeting for the West Essex Highland will be January 29th, 2025 in person at 6:30 PM in council chambers. No additional notice will be required. As this is the. Sure. I'd like to thank everybody on the board, Mr. Fagan, our zoning official, Ms. Janice Gary Adams, Yamilet, and Mr. Hazel and Mr. Taylor standing in for Mr. Hess. You've all done an outstanding job. Before the end of the year, I will have all the applications we've seen, the special meetings. And on behalf of the township, I thank you very much for your service. Council President, thank you so much for sitting in with us. You've been outstanding.
It's been a pleasure.
Great. A motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? The ayes are above the nose.
Thank you.